This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 160. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And welcome to the Fine Telemark Podcast. Every Monday, I'm here talking about what's going on in the Freeheel world, specifically for all you knee droppers out there, dropping knees, taking names. This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, and always happy to be here. So let's hop right into it. Newsroom and notes. We've been running a new schedule here at the Freeheel Life retail shop in Salt Lake. We are now open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, noon until 7 p.m., Saturday, 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. We are closed on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. So it's been working out pretty well for us. Hopefully it's been working out for you as well. We are obviously in Monday through Saturday, still answering emails, trying to keep up with all of the customer service emails coming in. There's a lot of you out there. We're doing our best. Like I always say, we're a small crew, so please be patient. And we are doing our best to answer all your questions, whether they be simple questions about getting into Telemark and what setup you need, or technical questions about equipment, old and new. We get some funny ones. Honestly, I should probably have a segment on the podcast, not to make fun of anyone, because I won't say names, but there's always interesting emails, and sometimes we get a kick out of them, and we're always happy to help. But there's a lot of interesting nomenclature and different eras of Telemark and parts and all sorts of weird stuff. So sometimes things get mixed up, and we get a good laugh out of those. So anyways, thanks for thinking of us regardless. Every time you think about Telemark skiing, that is our objective, is to be the spot to go for your needs on information and to support our brand. So on that, as far as gear goes, we've had the whole boot gate situation. Scarpa's boots, they haven't arrived in America. Well, I've got some good news. So Friday, we got word. The plane has landed. It is on the ground. It did not burn up in the sky. It did not crash in the ocean with all of our Telemark boots. So, which I was kind of afraid of, like at this point I was like, what else could possibly happen? Oh, you know what? I really hope that the boots don't land in the ocean and we have no boots at all, but they have made it to Salt Lake City. And as of the recording of this podcast, or when you're going to be hearing it, actually, we should be getting boots either this afternoon or tomorrow is our hope. That's our hope, to get in-house. Then we've got to process them. Everyone who's got boots on order with us, we've got to get them shipped out. So I'm thinking late in the week, prior to us walking out for the holiday, most likely, if boots have been ordered, they're going to be heading out and getting shipped to you. So sorry for the delay. We are proud to be the only ones that will have boots probably for the coming weeks here in North America, and we're psyched about that. And we really, really appreciate you supporting us as the spot that you're getting your Scarpa boots, because that pays paychecks, and that makes it so we can answer all of the fun questions and make sure you're taken care of from everything from basic knowledge to warranty needs. And that's why we encourage you to support us, because we're there for you, and we want you to be there for us. So stay tuned for more on that in the next 48 to 72 hours, and we should have even more specific updates once they actually are in-house. But that is good news. So, new content to check out. We brought one of my favorites back that I started way back in like 2012, so like a decade ago, called One Hot Minute. And this is little takes on hot tips. We take about a minute. This week, Taylor Johnson is talking about stomping your landing on Telemark skis, and super excited about that. I know I'm going to have a couple little follow-up videos with that one, because I'm fascinated, and I kind of predicted some of the responses to that video, and I'm looking forward to responding to them. So thank you for engaging with the content too, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. We love it all. I'm reading those comments, and it gives me lots to think on, talk on, chomp on. It's good stuff. There's also a fun short video / reel that's up, depending on where you're. There's like different names for stuff. On YouTube, it's a short. On Instagram and Facebook, it's a reel. Either way, the boys got out and got some deep snow. Good Utah powder at Alta ski area this week. It's been an amazing snow cycle, and you can check that out on all of our social medias to get some extra stoke going if you don't have that kind of snow going on in your area. And Dossie's View number 61 is up, kind of a follow-up to one of the podcasts about is Telemark relevant in 2022. Check it out. His thoughts are great on it. He kind of riffed off the podcast, and I love seeing people, honestly, I think the best part about it is most people's responses, who cares? So I think that's the synopsis, which goes nicely with the Telemark personality that I'm always talking about. Is you're kind of like, who gives two shits whether it's relevant or not? I'm doing it. I'm stoked. And I fully agree with you. So anyways, check those videos out. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on the social medias, whatever your platform is that you use, or multiple. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and then of course sign up for the mailing list because it kind of aggregates it all there. You can pick and choose where you want to get it. This week, stay tuned for another Dossie's View episode number 62. We'll have another one hot minute and plenty more. And upcoming podcasts to look forward to. Spoke with a good friend of mine, Decker Jory. This is going to be a really good one. I'm psyched. He's an early Summit County Telemark park skier. It's kind of how we knew each other. We skied on the Targhee team back in the day in the early mid 2000s. Really cool character. You probably have never heard his name. I would venture to say that he has a lot, like many people, had a lot more influence on stuff than people may recognize his name. If you remember the old Targhee Team 100 and the early, the second Targhee Agent, he did the graphics for those. So if you remember the green little G.I. Joe bazooka guy on the Team 100, he was the guy who did the graphics for that. So anyways, that'll be a fun one. I talked about Sarah Clemenson. She's a good friend of mine, skied for Nike and did a bunch of Warren Miller movies along with some of the Unparalleled films, and we're going to get her on as well. And there's lots more. I'm ticking through the list. Also, I just want to mention I have gotten a couple requests from listeners to be on the podcast, which I threw out, and definitely am going to look at doing those in the new year. So bear with me. I'm as always, I'm always giving that disclaimer. I'm pretty much rolling solo. So I am the production team, and I am the talent, if you want to call it that. So that's a debatable word, but I'm doing my best, and we'll try to keep up with that. But I think 2023 is going to be rocking and rolling. Plenty of history guests and lots to talk about in the coming year. So it's going to be a good time, and I'm stoked. So my guest today is originally from Arkansas, where he grew up enjoying the outdoors and getting exposed to many of his experiences through the Boy Scouts. It was one of his scouting experiences at the age of 14 when he went to New Mexico and first saw the Rocky Mountains. He told me, "I came home from that trip, but I don't think I really came home. My heart was in the mountains at that point." From that point forward, it was a personal quest of his to go back to the mountains. As he got a little older, he landed a job at a local shop called Take a Hike that sold mountaineering, backpacking, and hiking equipment in Arkansas. The owner of the shop encouraged him to go to the National Outdoor Leadership School, otherwise known as NOLS, and take a course in Colorado to enhance his outdoor knowledge and skills. This experience blew things wide open to the possibilities of working in the outdoor space. His love for the big mountains soon led him to buy property near Wilson, Wyoming, where he built a small home for his wife and 2 kids. They moved there full time, and he began working for Exum Mountain Guides in the Teton area, as well as teaching skiing at Grand Targhee. Although he was a self-described intermediate skier during this time, his time on the snow led him to want to attempt to create a better freeheel binding. This was the spark that led to the creation of his own company that would make some of the most iconic and important Telemark bindings of the last 3 decades. He created and sold his Telemark bindings from the late 1980s until the early 2000s. From stainless steel toe plates to the 6-hole mounting pattern to many, many other things, his impact is still seen in our bindings today. It was an absolute honor and a privilege to speak with him about his story, his bindings, and Telemark. So please welcome to the show, Russell Rainey. All right, Russell, welcome to the Freeheel Life podcast. How's it going?
Thanks, man. It's going great. We got a bluebird day down here in Durango this morning after a little bit of snow yesterday for some good skiing.
I love that. That's awesome, man. Well, first off, I just want to say it's an honor to have you on. You were like top 3 people that I wanted to track down when I started this thing 3 years ago. And so thank you for making the time. I appreciate it.
Well, who are the other 2?
Well, I'm in a ballpark in top 3. I'm thinking Dickie Hall was one.
Oh my gosh, I love that boy.
Yeah, and I was texting him the other day, and I mean, there's probably like top 10, top 20. I mean, if I really think about it, I want to talk to everybody. But
that's cool.
Dickie's always it's fun because like we only text like once a year, and I'm always like, hey, are you ready? And he'll always be like, not yet. And I'm like, okay, I'll try next year.
Revenge of the telemarker.
I know. Yeah.
I had all those things on VHS tapes back in the day. I was before you could, watch them anywhere streaming or whatever.
Yeah.
I assume they're out there on YouTube or what, but if they're not, they need to be.
Yeah, we've got a couple on our YouTube channel that he let us put up there, and then same thing. I've got some DVDs and some VHS tapes, so it's wild. That
was, of course, living in Jackson Hole those years, we were in the scene out there in New England skiing, but everybody I ever talked to about their highlight of the year was going to Dickie's festival, Telemark Festival, and it was just, he was just amazing at it, and kind of single-handedly did his part to promote Telly.
Yep.
And for a long time.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's where with the podcast, I've been sort of trying to piece together a lot of these folks in the past. I think that's what's kind of funny is, even talking to guys like you that haven't been necessarily in the business of telemark for so long, I'll reach out to people and they're like, why do you want to talk to me? And I'm like, cause I want to know what happened, like, tell me the story. So it's really cool to get you on the line. So I guess I didn't even realize, so you're living in Colorado now full time?
Yep. In Durango, we're just starting our 5th year. My geographic history. I grew up just outside Little Rock, Arkansas, out in the country. And my wife did too, not in the country. She was a city girl. And then we got married, had a couple of kids. And at 25, when our kids were 1 and 3, it's a long time ago. So I'm, if I seem like I'm hesitating, I'm not making it up. I'm trying to remember as best I can. We moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We literally it was like wagons, trains west. We put all our crap in the back of a rider, towed the one car we had behind the rider, and the 4 of us, and my wife, myself, and a 1 and 3-year-old in the front part of it, and just wagon trains west headed to Jackson Hole. And So I had the previous year, well, we bought our land out there in 86. We bought a couple acres about 1,000 feet off the valley floor overlooking the Snake River, right about halfway up Teton Pass. So if anybody there knows Teton Pass, we were about halfway up. And so anyway, but I'd gone out. My dad was a home builder for 50-something years. I've been building houses off and on my whole life. And so I built a little cabin we lived in all the years that we were out there, and just absolutely loved it. But we got to a magical season where we were empty nest. Our two kids had headed off to college and adulthood, and my parents were doing great back in Arkansas. My wife's parents were doing great in Arkansas. So we had about a 10-year clip in there. My wife and I just did some really fun stuff. We lived in Africa for 3 years. It was a 5-year project, kind of economic development project for Rwanda, kind of trying to help them rebuild out of the genocide. And anyway, long story short, just a great season. About the time that was coming to an end, my dad got Alzheimer's. And so we just decided, rather than go back to Jackson or anywhere else, that we wanted to be in Little Rock and help my dad through that season. He passed about 5 years ago. And we knew that, if we really wanted to be back in the Mountain West. I mean, that's just where our hearts are. And so looked around. I was familiar, with our business for years. I had the luxury of kind of knowing just about every ski town in the Mountain West, and even having, people I knew, friends, and customers, and that whenever I'd go on the road, trying to sell bindings and stuff, it was great. You come into town and the people would roll out the red carpet for you, whether it was just a customer or like a store owner or something. And they were always, "Oh, come on, man, let's go do our favorite, run, or do this, or favorite restaurant." It was just always fun, going around doing that. People are always so generous. And and then I worked for Exum Mountain Guides. I was an Knowles instructor for a while. That's kind of what got me into the higher end of mountaineering. And then got an invitation from Exum, which, if people don't know, just kind of Google Exum. It's the most famous guide service on the planet, and just the list of legendary mountaineers that have been Exum guides at one time or the other. So that was a great deal, being there in Jackson and doing that. But we had a lot of the guides didn't live there year round. In fact, there was only a handful of us that wintered there, and we were the ones that kind of started the winter ski program at Exum. One of my best friends, Tom Turiano, a good buddy, Stephen Koch, Mark Newcomb. It was just, Doug Coombs. Those guys were all just a part of that scene. It was really fun. Anyway, but a lot of several of the guides were down in the Southwest Colorado area, like Michael Friedman, who's kind of famous. So he was the guy that was the head avalanche control guy, that basically he was in the helicopter when they were flying up over Red Mountain Pass, strapping 5-pound charges to a 50-pound bag of fertilizer and kicking it out of the helicopter to try to set off a slope. And just some of the tales from Mike, and of course Mike's greatest sort of claim to fame in all of our eyes was that you guys are old enough, maybe remember the headline of this, but Christy Brinkley was sort of the beauty icon of the day, and she had gone heli skiing up there, and Mike was one of the guides on the heli that day, and their helicopter crashed.
Oh, geez.
And it was sort of they were coming in on final, and they just kind of somehow, nobody really knows for sure, but the helicopter just did a slow roll. Of course, it destroyed the helicopter, and people got sort of bruised inside and stuff, but nobody really hurt. But all we wanted to know about Mike, we didn't care about the helicopter crash. It was like, tell us about Christy Brinkley.
That's like
total guy thing.
National Lampoon's Vacation era. Yeah. Uh-huh. That's National Lampoon's Vacation era, like when she was like
exactly. Yeah. If you guys remember that, the really beautiful girl that was in the sports car and then the swimming pool and all that.
Yeah,
that was Christy.
Yeah, totally.
So we were all like, Michael's all right. He's still around. Anyway, so all that, guys in Ridgeway, there's Paul Hebert down there. I don't know if you talked to Paul lately or not, but he was the one that really is responsible for all these great climbing skins that we have now. He was the one that first believed in and pioneered and stuck with until he got it right, hot glue.
Yeah.
Which was the game changer. Everything before that, people didn't know, was solvent based, which had all kinds of problems, from sticking to the skin properly to destroying your ski wax to, all kinds of things. And so Paul really did that. And then Black Diamond bought Paul out, years and years ago.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about that.
But Paul was over in Ridgeway.
Yeah. That's just right over the pass from you
That's
guys.
just over the hill. Yeah. You go over the hill. I mean, you get to the top of the hill, you're at Silverton, go down Red Mountain, you're at Ouray, and then the next thing you hit's Ridgeway, and then you turn up towards Telluride. And anyway, long story short, my wife and I, we were looking back in Mountain West. We knew we had some time because my dad was still there, and unfortunately, in the meantime, my mother-in-law had gotten terminal cancer, and so it was just that season. Anybody that's been through that, that's just kind of everybody gets their turn in those tough seasons, and that was ours. And so, but we wanted to keep looking and making plans, and so we were able to pull the trigger, and so we just kind of did research, mountain living research, one vacation at a time. And we sort of circled all over. Made our way up, even into the BC area, and all along the West Coast, and then the Intermountain West, and as we did that, and then we just kept sort of ranking, the places we loved, and there were so many places. But living in Jackson for 25 years, we had a list of things that we loved and we wanted to see repeated. There was a list of things that were kind of missing that we would like to see in addition. And there were things that were a part of living in Jackson Hole that we didn't want to see repeated, if at all possible. And so anyway, all that, and just, the vibe and the thing, and Durango just kept coming to the top of the list. And so we ended up, buying a piece of property here, and I've already built a couple houses, one for my wife and I. That's a longer story, but I live in a full, anybody knows me knows I'm not going to do something normal. I built a full-on barn dominium. And if you guys know what that is, don't know what it is, it's a huge, basically barn. It's a steel building kind of thing, but part of it is residential. So it kind of, you come inside. But the funnest part is when you first come inside, the little kind of just north of Durango, this little gas station enclave is called Hermosa. And so we call the barn back there the Hermosa Rec Center, because I've got a full legit climbing wall in there. And it goes 20 feet vertical, and then it inverts for the next 20 feet along the roof line.
Oh, wow.
Then I got a little soccer pitch, because next door to me, the second house I built was for my daughter, son-in-law, my two grandsons, which are like my mini-me's, having the best time ever, I think. I had an amazing time with my kids, but grandkids are really just a whole different animal. And so the boys and I, we're constantly out in the mountains, and then when we can't go in the mountains, we're in the barn, doing something guy-like, and so it's pretty fun.
I love that. Wow.
So I've kind of been rambling about your question about Durango, but yeah, we live in Durango. We're just loving it here.
No, I love that you got there. I mean, and I guess I didn't realize you're from Little Rock originally, or out in the country. I've been through there.
Well, where I grew up in Little Rock is like the main part of the, kind of the affluent part of town, because we were out west of town, and the whole town moved west. And so I can go to like the woods I used to grow up in, and it's all neighborhoods or shopping malls or, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I've been through Arkansas, lived in Missouri when I was a little kid for a little while. So, I mean, I'm familiar with that part of the country, and I can say that there are some rolling hills, but not huge mountains. So I'm kind of curious, like, when did skiing come in the picture? Because I think Arkansas is one of those, I don't think there's a ski area there, or maybe there was.
No, well, it's funny, off and on. So there was if you guys remember the comic strips, Little Abner, and it was Dogwood, Arkansas was where it was fictitiously set. It was like this hillbilly family, and it was just a funny comic strip back in the day. Anyway, Dogwood, actually, way before Dollywood, they had a little theme park up there, a little roller coaster and fishing pond. I mean, it was just fun. They even had a little short cog railway that took you from the parking lot up to the hill to where all the stuff was. Anyway, but the next to Dogwood, there was a place called Marble Falls that they would make snow on. And I never skied there because I wasn't skiing when I was a kid when they were doing it. And then it kind of shut down for probably a whole lot of obvious reasons, lack of cold weather being the biggest one. But I heard that the Johnny Morris, the guy who does Bass Pro Shop, and the Big Cedar Lodge is one of the huge kind of things in the Ozarks up there as far as a place to go. It's just everything Johnny Morris touches, he does. And whether you like what he's doing or not, you could just go, well, he did it right. Whatever it was, Johnny does it right. So I heard that Johnny was going to try to reopen that thing. And so there may someday again be turns. I did do a little skiing years and years later, just a couple years before we moved to Jackson Hole. When it would snow in Little Rock, you could go out on the golf courses because it's kind of rolling hill sort of terrain, and kind of cross country ski. That's all we had. But there'd be a little hill that you could maybe make one or two turns, on, and that was kind of skiing. But I grew up in the Boy Scouts. I grew up in the country. I mean, I had my first horse when I was 4. We were country kids. I went to the little high school out there that was kind of known as Redneck High. And it earned that reputation at times. And I just absolutely loved it. It was just so good. And sports, I played, basically every sport that they offered, and even ones I wasn't very good in, because I just love activities. And I really think that's how I didn't end up in jail for a longer period of time than probably should have, because sports scrubbed off a lot of excess energy. Most of my sins were just sins of energy and enthusiasm. And anyway, so I got into the Boy Scouts. My dad was a big fan of the Boy Scouts. And so got in. It just happened that we had a great troop where the leaders were super outdoorsy, and they made sure that we were doing something outdoorsy, typically a backpacking trip every month. And it was just like clockwork. So I started like at 10 years old, all the way through, and I got my Eagle Scout. And then at 14, so this is 1976. At 14, I went to the high adventure experience in the Boy Scouts out in Cimarron, New Mexico, not far from Taos out there, called Philmont Scout Ranch. And it's still.
Oh yeah, I've read about Philmont. Was this like were you an explorer at the time or something like that?
Well, no, I wasn't. I was still in the Scouts. I was just 14. You had to be at least 14.
Yeah,
you'd be 14 to go to Philmont. And so I went. I already had my Eagle Scout. I got if.
Wow, you hustled, man.
Well, that's the thing. Because there's a time frame, people don't know. You've got to earn and do a certain amount of things, earn merit badges, do a certain amount of things to progress in your ranks. But then there's also a time delay. So even if you had all your stuff, you have to wait from the last rank to the next rank. Well, if you got everything done and did those time things, it takes exactly 2 years. So if you can start at 11, I said 10 because between Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts is WEBLOs for 1 year, and which stands for We'll Be Loyal Scouts. And that was where our WEBLO, I can't remember what they called him, I don't know, but he was our troop leader, or WEBLO troop leader, was literally an old Army drill sergeant. He had us out in his front yard doing close order drills, like you see him doing the whole thing, which was the coolest thing for a 10-year-old, because we were learning how to, about face, right face, all the different close order drills.
Yeah.
He took us out. He literally had his M1 rifle for when he had used it in the Korean War, and we got to shoot it, and it was just total boy stuff. It was just so fun. But at 11, you could potentially get your Eagle Scout on your 13th birthday. Well, I got it about 3 months after my 13th birthday.
Wow! It
just powered through, and anyways, long story short, I started getting, so at 14, went to Philmont Scout Ranch. First time I'd ever been to the Rocky Mountains. And I've said a million times, and I couldn't mean it more today than it's always meant, is I came home after that, but I don't think I ever really came home. My heart was in the mountains at that point. And so it was just a quest and a quest and a quest. Someday, this is where my life needs to be. Had no idea about even that there were careers in the outdoor biz or anything. It's just, your heart just pulls you to places. So my dad, being a home builder, and this was back in the day where they would put all these sort of conferences and other, business things, but they were always wrapped around a vacation because you could write all that stuff off a lot easier back then. And so the next year when I was 15, my dad somehow found out about this it was like a building management conference out in Aspen. And we literally stayed, anybody knows Aspen, especially back in the day, we stayed right at the base of Buttermilk, which is kind of the mellow, it's like the mellowest of all the ski areas there. But it was perfect for a kid from Arkansas that couldn't ski. And the way they ran those things is like the meetings were these are quotes, were from 7 a.m. till 9 a.m. Well, the lifts just happened to open at 9.
Yeah, well timed.
And then the meetings in the afternoon started at like 4 or 4:30, whatever it was, but it was just a cocktail hour. You kind of figure out. And of course, it was me and my brother. My brother's 11 months and 3 days older than me. And we just kind of, my dad fixed us up with some ski lessons like the first, day or whatever, which was great. And then we would just, my brother and I, we were athletic. And so, you pick a horrible technique, but you're athletic enough to survive it. And of course, it was just full on alpine, we rented gear and the whole deal. But man, it was so fun. And then we did that again the next year. And then I didn't ski again until I was in college, and I organized a trip, for just a couple of buddies, like, hey man, we ought to go do a ski trip. And I never, of course, it was already done for me and my parents. I didn't know how much something cost. I didn't know how to do anything, but it was basically me and a couple of buddies just got in a car and we just drove until we came to a place. And then we were like, okay, now what do we do? So fortunately, it wasn't a big high season, or we would have been sleeping in our car. Of course, we didn't even know that there were high season or low season. And anyways, kind of had fun. And then after college, I settled back in Little Rock. And of course, that was the time we met my wife, started having kids. But there was an outdoor shop there that I used to just hang out in. A lot of folks out there that love going to an outdoor shop. When you can't go in the outdoors, go to an outdoor shop. And it was called Take a Hike. And it was a real legit mountaineering shop. And the owner there and I got to be good friends. And he was the one. I started just doing stuff in the mountains, and there's some pretty good rock climbing in Arkansas, but I started doing some stuff in the hills and the mountains. And I remember having a conscious thought thinking, man, I really love doing this, but I'd got myself in a couple of places that, I was like, man, this is a bad spot. I would not want to fall here. and so I just kind of said, I may need, if I want to keep doing this and not die, I need to get some training. And so I talked to my buddy, Frank Barton, who owned the shop there. And Frank said, there's a school out it's out west somewhere. I'm not exactly sure, called the National Outdoor Leadership School. And they're kind of renowned for, being the place to get the bitch education. I was like, great. Well, just so happened that time, National Outdoor Leadership School, called, everybody knows it as Knowles, they were doing these teeny little ads in the back of like Backpacker and Outside Magazine. And Frank kind of flipped through there and he said, yeah, here's, kind of her deal. And I called up anyway. I think that was in the fall. Well, I signed up and went to as a student, my first Knowles course in, God, I don't remember what year it was. It would have been like 85, maybe, something around that, 84 maybe. And it was 84. It was 84 or 83. Anyway, doesn't matter. And went out there, and of course that just opened to a whole different thing. Everything from kind of the best of the Boy Scout experience to just a whole different level, not only high adventure and training for high adventure and climbing, but this idea of not just scorched earth, which was more the typical thing of a Boy Scout camp out experience. Cut down a bunch of trees. We're going to lash them together and build towers. I loved all that stuff, but it's not obviously the same thing. And in fact, Knowles came up with a program that everybody's heard of now called Leave No Trace. And Knowles came up with that, and just the Forest Service really liked it. And so Knowles just gave it to them basically. And the Forest Service, that's their big minimum impact, thing, is Leave No Trace. And that was just the Knowles ethic at the time. A guy named Paul Petzel started Knowles. And Paul, I mean, if you want to know the guy who basically created all the great mountaineering training that the globe has to offer, you can trace most of it back to Paul Petzel, all the way back to the famous 10th Mountain Division. But anyway, so Paul, it started that, but it was all about, his goal was somebody could go, because he had helped start the Colorado Outward Bound. And what he really wanted, after he saw the people having these kind of, all the good that could come from these stress challenge situations, which was kind of what Colorado Outward Bound or the Outward Bound program was. But people were really no better prepared to go back in the mountains after those. They had just had these stress challenge situations. And so he wanted to combine both of them. So he started putting education. His goal for the National Outdoor Leadership School was that when you got done with a 30-day program, you could literally go grab a few buddies who knew nothing, get some more food, go back in the mountains, and you could take them to the same program you had just been through. Because it's just teaching, learning. It's always been that way. And anyway, so I was a student, went through it, loved it. They invited me to come back and take an instructor's course, which I did a little bit. That was the time I already had 2 kids at this point. It was getting more and more difficult to be gone for those long periods of time. And it was about that time I got noticed for doing some mountaineering stuff, and got this amazing call from Peter Lev, actually one of the 4 owners of, and you may know Peter. Peter's down in the Salt Lake area where he was. Now he's actually more closer to me now. But Peter was one of the pioneers in avalanche education, particularly theory. His Luna Lanch and all kinds of different things that he had. He believed, and he's right, that as the moon pulls on the ocean to create tides, the moon also pulls on the snowpack to affect avalanche conditions. The reality, the research has been done, and yes, it does have effect, but it's never been enough that you could kind of call it even a major factor of avalanche. But he was smart enough to know that it had to have an effect, and it did. Anyway, so I started working, and that was the time it was like, okay, now I got a real job in Jackson Hole, at least for 12 weeks of the summer. And so let's just move. And that's how we got to that, the wagon train west, going out there, showed up literally without a job. And I had camped out on the little couple acres that we had. I had camped out literally in the tent and built the little cabin until it was livable. My wife seems to remember I said it was finished. I swear I did not. Now, I grew up in half-finished houses. My dad was a home builder, and so our house was always for sale. And so people, buy it, and we just move in and whatever the next closest thing to finished was. I mean, regularly it was the houses didn't even have windows in it yet and stuff. So it's kind of camp out. And my mom was a good sport, and it was just me and my brother. And so, we would just work, on the house all the time. And then we, kind of move on to the next one. And so when I told my wife it was livable, we did have windows in it, by the way.
I hope so. That's sheetrock. That's a little. That's probably a little colder out there. It's probably a little colder in Jackson than in Little Rock.
Yeah, and it was. It was basically May. In fact, it was the first night. And this is by coincidence. That our wedding anniversary is May 4th. And it just worked. I never even thought about it until that day. But our very first night in our new house in Jackson Hole, and it really was a very small little cabin thing that I just loved, was on our 4th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, that was really good. And so we stayed there the whole time. If anybody knows Jackson, we were in Wilson, which is where Teton Pass comes out. And so it was... I don't know. I've kind of rambled on. I don't know.
No, that's good. And so this is
track we got.
so Knowles is what took you out there. That was the gig that you picked
it's what
up.
It exposed me and gave me confidence that I could do something in the mountains, and I was pretty athletic, and so the climbing part came easy. It was learning the technical skills, so I didn't die climbing. I kind of early on, I set a goal for my outdoor career is that my tombstone would never read, "Here lies a dumbass."
That's a
that
fair.
was really
That's
that
a
was my
fair
only
headstone.
goal. There was no ultimate shame to my grave. And before Knowles, there, and a few times after, there's been lots of opportunities that I could have had that tombstone. So,
Oh man.
and then when I got to Exum, Exum is just got such a history. It was actually, what the crazy thing was, Knowles was started by Paul Petzel. Well, Exum Mountain Guides was actually started by Paul Petzel too.
Oh,
and you'd
wow.
have to go and kind of see. But he was a farm boy from Idaho who, when he was 16 or 17, climbed the Grand in cowboy boots with his brother. Came back in. He was just working as a ranch hand. Came back into town. The only kind of bar at the time was the Crabtree Hotel. And if you guys know anything about Jackson Hole or the Crabtrees, there's two kind of super legit mountain shops in Jackson Hole. There's Teton Mountaineering and there's Skinny Skis. And Skinny Skis has, until just I think this last year, Jeff finally I think sold out. Was started, owned, and run by Jeff Crabtree of that kind of 100-year-old legacy in there, the Crabtree Hotel. Anyway, so Petzel goes in, he and his brother are bragging at the bar, and I think I was pretty sure they were having adult beverages at 16, 17. Of course, nobody cared back then. And all the guys in the bar were just calling BS on him, about lying, about climbing the Grand. And the little guy sitting at the end of the bar motioned him over. They had a private conversation. This guy turns around, puts his arm around the two brothers and says, "Boys, these lads have been to the top." And the guy sitting at the bar was Billy Owen of the famed Owen Spalding route. He was the first person to climb the Grand.
Wow.
And he asked them questions that nobody would know if they hadn't been to the summit. So Paul still worked as a ranch hand when people would come to town interested in climbing. And back then, it wasn't dirtbag climbing. Back then, it was actually like the elite, because there was a leisure class, but it wasn't working people. And so very affluent people from the East Coast, royalty from Europe would come over, and they'd kind of find out. And Paul was sort of the first mountain guide in the Tetons, and then his sort of first assistant was this guy that was a music professor over in Idaho in college for 37 years, and would come over in the summers to kind of work the ranch, and he'd play the fiddle at the Hootenannies because there was no TV, there was no kind of bars, and so these ranches would be like, "Hey, Wednesday night we're over at the Jones Ranch," or whatever the name of it was, and they just have a kind of a social dancing, drinking, all kinds of stuff at the barn wherever, and the band would pop up, and that's called a hootenanny. And anyway, that's how they met each other. And long story short, the second time up the Grand, Petzel sent Glenn to go and check out this ridge that they had both seen, the most prominent ridge on the mountain, and while he was taking the clients up, and Glenn did this infamous climb of the Exum Ridge totally solo.
Wow.
And got to the top, and anyway, that was start of the legend. So Petzel, they guided together, and then Petzel moved on to other things, and it became the Exum School, North American School of Mountaineering, and then it just became Exum Mountain Guides years later. But Glenn was always a believer in mentoring. And I mean, it didn't matter what your resume was. You need to be mentored by the guys who, were there around particular routes, particular techniques for that route, escapes for that route, all kinds of things. And so it was just such a brotherhood and sisterhood. By the time I was there, there were some amazing, female guides and climbers. And anyway, so that was, kind of where I got, to be a part of that mountaineering community, and just, got to meet some icons of the sport, and both skiing and climbing. And, when I moved to Jackson, though, I was at best, skill-wise, at best, I was an intermediate skier.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you too, because it's sort of not an atypical story, but your story is definitely more. You're not just like skiing your whole life, and then you're like heading to Jackson Hole, which is like some of the bigger mountains in the Rockies. You're not some high level technician, so that
no, I didn't. I don't have the pedigree to be a snow skier. It was interesting though. My best sport, if you line me up, and I was captain of the football team, and so I was a decent athlete. But if you lined me up with all the sports I did growing up, the one that I stood out above the crowd most was water skiing. I started skiing in tournaments when I was 7 years old, and just kind of a little ripper, and so years later, when people will be like, how'd you learn to ski so good in Arkansas? I was like, dude, I've been skiing all this stuff my whole life. It was just melted when I skied.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to ask.
I was just going to say, so that was sort of the deal. But the crazy thing was, and I was working at Take a Hike, I had gone out. I'm still at Knowles, and still not sure I was going to be moving out the West. Really, didn't even know that's what people did. Because all my own experience, it was like a vacation as we went out the West, and I went out on my first sort of backcountry ski trip. And I'm not going to mention products or anything, but the state of the art binding of the time was not that good, and mainly because of the materials it was made out. It was made of those really crappy aluminum. It's like pot aluminum kind of stuff. And when it got super cold, because of the way they formed that stuff, there was all kinds of inherent stress cracking in the material. Well, this one trip I went on, it was 21 days, and everybody had at least one broken toe piece in the 21 days, and about half the people, both of them had broken. So we literally had our boots. These were lace-up leather boots back in the day. We had our boots permanently attached to the skis with wire and duct tape. So at night, we would simply just unlace our boots, slip our feet out into our down booties, and we'd stick our skis in the snow, boots attached. Because we weren't going to do that kind of cob it together, every day. We didn't have a wire to do that, and we survived literally. It was because we had 10 days in a row with a morning low. This is in the Wind River Range. 10 days in a row where the morning low was 30 below or colder. Wow. And those are the days everything just started cracking. And so we literally would get up in the morning. Our survival technique is just get up in the morning, because you try to get warm in the morning, right? When you're camping, it's just impossible. It's that cold. So we would just do whatever it took, just risking frostbite, even just shoving everything in your pack, getting on your skis, and just go humping it for about 5 miles to just try to generate some heat. And then we would stop and make breakfast, kind of thing, hopefully in a sunny spot. But that just went on and on. And I remember making this statement when I was on this expedition. I said, man, if I ever made a ski binding, Chris, it's just total bluster. I said, if I ever made a ski binding, I'd make it out of stainless steel.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
a little foreshadowing
history, there. that was kind of the deal. So I came back, and 3 weeks later, I had cobbed together my first binding. Now, I didn't know anything about metal. I was a carpenter. And all I knew about metal as a carpenter is if you touch it, you bleed. That was
what did you do?
All I knew about metal.
What did you do in college then? Do you have a degree in engineering?
No, I was more of a purist in the technical sense, in that I was a math physics guy and a philosophy theology guy. Huh. So I loved college because I love ideas and I love thinking. I went to a pretty prestigious academic school called Rhodes College, and it was just, the academics were just, I just loved it. But I was restless. So anyway, I got this thing cobbed together. Well, just work out that so this is 1987. We'd already bought our land in Jackson, but I had no idea we'd ever actually lived there permanently. My wife really had no idea. I had more kind of inkling when we bought the land, but she was like, I didn't think we'd ever live there. The big outdoor show at that time was the SIA, Ski Industry Association. And it was the big ski show, and it was out in Vegas. And they started after having just a little ballroom, a satellite ballroom that was just pure outdoor stuff, not ski. And there was just a few of the pioneers are out there, like Marmot. Eric Reynolds was still there as just, basically just kind of a cottage industry for Marmot Mountain Works, making their stuff. Moonstone Mountaineering, trying to remember that guy's name, great guy. I met Dana Gleason with Dana Design Packs, and then now I'll get it. What's the Mystery Ranch is what he's doing now. Anyway, he got to be just a great friend. He really mentored me in the outdoor business of manufacturing. Anyway, long story short, there's a little skier outside Vegas called Mount Charleston. And this show happened in, I think it was like late February or early March, about that time. And so I told Frank, hey, I'm taking my skis out because I want to go out a day early and go skiing. And he was like, you're crazy, man. There's no skiing out there. And he said, well, there might be. And so anyway, we went up to Mount Charleston the day before, and it was just perfect spring corn. And that was the very first time I skied my binding called the Super Loop. And it broke like 3 times, and mainly with the cable, because I didn't know anything about cables at the time. So the only thing I could find are cables. Everything was just parts from the hardware store. And then what I did know about sheet metal is the heat and air guys were the ones that did all the sheet metal work for housing. So I went to my dad's sheet metal guy and kind of told him I did, and he cobbed together this little stainless steel toe piece for me. But the cable going through it was literally a clothesline cable. That's what they had in the hardware store for like stretching a clothesline. Well, that type of cable, I learned, is not designed to flex back and forth. And so literally about, a couple dozen flexes and it just breaks. Well, and all I had left was some boot lace that I kind of went through there, and then I wrapped it with duct tape at the wear points, and it held together. Oh, and the tubing that I had, now this is back, if people don't remember, the original Super Loop there was a piece of stretchy tubing, just surgical tubing.
With the handle. With the handle on the back.
Yeah. Well, it didn't even have a handle at the time. But Yvon Chouinard, who, Chouinard Equipment was there at the time. Patagonia, his clothing thing, was a teeny little deal. He had a rugby shirt and some stand-up shorts. But so climbing, was what he's doing, climbing gear. And he made this little travel gym. In fact, I think he called it the travel gym. That was just what you see today. It was just a surgical tubing thing that you'd kind of had a little deal. You'd put it in the door jamb and shut the door, and then you would just, you could do curls or, different things off of it. And so we got one at the shop, and I was looking at it, and so that was where I got the surgical tubing for the first Super Loop. And I tried temp pole, shark cord, and all that, but the surgical tubing worked better. And so anyway, by the end of the day, I just had a great day skiing. To me, I kind of proof of concept that, hey, this binding could kind of do something, but not knowing, I'd ever sell one. I just knew I didn't want to have that horrible experience, all those broken toe pieces. And anyway, so that was kind of the beginning of the binding thing. While I was still living in Arkansas and still, at best, an intermediate skier. But the guys in Jackson, who were some of the best skiers and definitely some of the best extreme skiers on the planet, who were my guide buddies at Exum in the summer, were like, hey, come on, we'll go ski this. Hey, we'll go ski that. And I'm literally fighting for survival out there because I had no business getting on the slopes that these guys were getting me on. And years later, they would finally own up to the fact that, yeah, we were pretty worried about you. But I got better. And then within a few years, I was working on the Nordic team, teaching tele and track skiing over at Grand Targhee, underneath a couple of amazing skiers who really helped me ski. And just happened to be one of the other instructors was a guy named Claire Yost. And the history, Claire got Earl Miller to make a special version of the old Miller Soft, and it became the noodle, Yost Mark Mountain Noodle.
Yep.
The first really backcountry powder ski of any kind. Before Wiggly had done, what he was doing, way before. Did
Claire have his shop down there yet?
No, Claire was just getting Earl to make him a few pairs of skis a year, a little lighter than normal makeup, and then a different top sheet. And then he was just sort of selling them out of the back of his truck. And he was working as a ski instructor. He was like most of it. He was just trying to cob together a living. Yeah. A little bit of skiing, a little bit of work in the summer, kind of stuff. And then years later, he started the shop. And then now Rich Rinaldi owns that. Well, Rich came on staff along with Scott McGee over at Targhee. And we were all underneath the tutelage of an amazing instructor and one of the best technical skiers ever known, a guy named Kai Melville. And all of us went on to do things in the telemark industry. And really, Kai was the guy that, kind of groomed us in that. It was just great. And Rich and Scott, I don't know if you know Scott McGee.
Yeah, I know Scotty.
Scott has been on the Nordic national demo team for a long, long time. And then years later, actually ended up working for Exum. But Rich was probably one of the best tele skiers I've ever known. I put him in the top 10, and he was one of those guys that grew up on the blue ice in the East. He did have the pedigree. And what I've learned about those guys is I don't care how hard and good I've gotten at, skiing steeps and ice and all that. Those guys that just cut their teeth on it, you just can't match what they can do on the ice. and they just play on it. And I'm still like, no, I survived the ice at best.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting, man. You've crossed paths with some really interesting people over the years. I mean,
it was really just, all of it was just laid out for me. There was no plan. There was no particular reason, that I should have been, frankly, so blessed with all that, but I was, and I just appreciated. I never didn't realize how amazing what I was doing was.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, so you're at Targhee, you're being mentored by these great skiers. There's obviously, there's a ton of history right there. You're talking Claire Yost, Scotty McGee's there,
Yep.
all of this stuff. At what point did you sort of go, okay, I've made this hardware binding, I think maybe I should take a stab at creating, Rainey designs. I'm assuming at some point you kind of were like, well, let's maybe give this a shot as a business.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because the Rainey Designs was easy because my mentor in sort of making something was Dana Gleason, and his business was Dana Design. So I was like, all right, we'll do it Rainey Designs. I copied him every stretch of the way, and he was so good to me. And just give you an idea how we worked. The very first year Dana Design sold packs. He was private label making packs for Marmot Mountain Works for a couple of years, and then Marmot wanted to go in some technical directions that Dana just was not interested in. So he said, you know what, I'm just going to go on my own. But he, at that time for the Marmot packs, those were the first packs that had a plastic frame sheet with aluminum stay that shaped it. That was Dana's sort of, that was his real deal, kind of like where stainless steel is our toe piece. That was the anchor of all his products. Well, so he went out on Dana Designs. The very first year Dana Designs in business, Take a Hike in Little Rock, Arkansas was by far their biggest dealer. And that was because if anybody came into the shop when I was working in there, because I kind of jumped thing, but Frank asked me after I came back from Knowles course, he asked me to come work for him at Take Hike. And if you came in at Take Hike looking for a backpack, you were going to walk out with a Dana. And I would write him, he's so presumptuous, like he'd send a model. I would literally write like a 10-page critique and mail it off to him. This is before electronic and all that kind of stuff. And I'm, I look back now and go, I'm sure he's just thinking, who is this just kid bugging the crap out of me? But he, would implement some of my ideas. And I remember I went to that first outdoor retailer show, and I knew he was going to be out there. And my daughter had been born, and I showed up at the thing, and it was the first time I met him in person, and showed up at the deal, and was anyway, got talking, and he said, I got something for you. And he pulls out this little baby Dana Design backpack in that red color. Everything was either red or gray when he was early on. And the red Cordura fabric that had it in, that he had custom made, hand sewn himself for my little daughter.
Oh, man.
And we still got it. My grandkids use that backpack now. So, but Dana was just, real encouraging. And so to get to your point, so I decided this first year in Jackson Hole, I was going to go for it and make 200 bindings. And I'd way upgraded everything. I, found obviously better cables. I'd found better stuff. And I was always thinking and looking like I'd work carpentry in the off season of guiding and stuff. And I was looking for something on the end of the cable that will allow me to attach the tubing to it. I didn't know anything about fittings on the end of cables or anything like that. And I'm literally sitting in the porta potty, John, on the job site. And there's a cable, like when you swing the door open, there's like this little cable that's spring-loaded that closes the john. Well, there's a fitting, there's a ball molded on the end of those little cables. Now, these are really small cables, like 1/16 of an inch cables, because they didn't have to be very strong. But I took a actually, I don't even think I took a picture because we didn't have a phone at that point. I think I just sketched it, wrote down the name and number on the porta potty manufacturer, call these guys cold, ask them, where in the hell did you get these, fittings on in the deal? Well, they turned me over, gave me the name. They're super nice, gave me the name of a company in Wichita, Kansas, actually a subsidiary of Boeing Aircraft. If you know anything about Wichita, that's aviation history with Cessna and Boeing and Beech. That company made these cable fittings because they were crucial for airplanes back then, because those were the push-pull controls that were cable operated, and there had to be a fitting on them, and not just a fitting, it had to be a fitting that was stronger than the cable. And so they sent me this catalog, all these fittings, and I'm like a kid in a candy store, kind of thing. Anyway, so that was where then we would slip the tubing over that ball and then put a clamp on the end of it, and kind of just cinch it so it couldn't come back off. Anyway, so I'd gotten all this kind of up there, and my very first customer, I went to Targhee. I'd been skiing over there a little bit, and I just cold called on this guy that was running the Nordic Center named Kai Melville. And I showed him this thing. We went out and skied, and I didn't want to embarrass to show him the binding. I was embarrassed to go skiing with him because I was such a bad skier. and Kai, we came down, and Kai said, dude, I really think you got something there. And there's all lace-up leather boots. He said, I'll buy 20 pairs.
Whoa.
And it marked, this was my sales cycle all along. If you went skiing with me or even saw me at a trade show, you were ready to buy my bindings. I just, I'm enthusiastic about stuff. And the worst thing I ever was in any of that was asking for the order. So if Kai had not have said, I want 20 of them, I never would have said, hey, do you want to buy some? I've never been able to do that. It's just kind of not my DNA. But I can go, so I'd have people go, look, stop talking. Just give it, here's our order. Because I wasn't really interested in selling bindings. I was an enthusiast and still am. And so, by the way, I got to give a shout out. I ran into a guy yesterday, I didn't even know he lived in Durango, who was one of our probably, we always had about 100 guys that I knew around the country that just were super enthusiastic, and they were my gold star customers. They weren't always the easiest customers, but they were the ones that gave me what I needed to keep improving the product. You kind of got three levels of customers. You got ones that love you, and they're just, no matter what you do, they're just raving fans. And that feels good, but frankly, it's not that helpful. Then you got guys that hate you. No matter what you do, they're going to hate what you did. Of course, that doesn't feel good, and it's not very helpful. But in the middle, you got these guys that love what you're trying to do. And they're going to stick with you if you'll just keep trying. And those are the folks that are gold that I would send like new prototypes to, or even a new part, say, hey, trade this out, see if this is working. And Josh was one of those guys. We had about 6 inches of snow yesterday. It was good skiing. It was fun. But at the top of the first lift, I looked over, and there's a guy wearing Super Loops. And of course, the Hammerhead way surpassed what the Super Loop did. But it was the last version of the Super Loop, the one that really worked great with Terminators. Because, the problem is, by the time I was getting into bindings, the boots started changing. From cuffs on leather boots to buckles on leather boots to now full plastic boots. All those binding manufacturers said, well, they named the Terminator right because it was the Terminator of binding. And then once I got a Super Loop that was strong enough that the boot couldn't break it, then it was ripping out of skis. And Josh and I were laughing about that. And it was like, yeah, we all just figured you had just T-nut. You literally drill all the way through the ski, recess a T-nut in the base, do a little PTEX candle over it to kind of patch it, and then your bindings to pull out your ski anymore. Anyway, so he had that, and I was like, dude, Super Loops? He's like, how'd you know what those were? And I said, well, I used to have a pair of those.
No way.
So we got talking, and so we just skied together all day yesterday. So shout out to Josh. And then there was another guy And I swear, I thought his name was Tucker, but I don't know if that's right. And I actually rode up the lift before I met Josh, just rode up the lift from the base with him, and he was on tele gear. He had made a really poor choice in bindings, but we won't talk about that. And so we just got talking, and it turns out he knows you, and I think he even maybe worked for you for a little while, but he loved your shop there and the whole thing. So I was like, and then I ran into Josh. I was like, man, this is perfect setup for having this call today. And
I love that.
Where I got off our storyline.
No. That's totally fine. It's funny because the Super Loop, it's like it kind of doesn't surprise me that you bumped into somebody. I think it's funny that you're the guy who made the binding, and here you are in 2022, and you're like, wow, really? All right. Yeah. That's pretty interesting, because we still sell Super Loop parts. Like,
nice.
It's so funny because, and I think that's why I was so excited to talk to you. And then we can go back on the timeline here. But I think what's been most interesting to me is that certain bindings, like you said, that I love how you said that middle customer, because I totally know what you're talking about. It's they believe in what you're trying to accomplish, and they're willing to stick with you. And I think also those people tend to have like a relationship with the binding and the boot combo, especially. And so when I tell people that have been around Telemark for, 30, 40 years in the business, and I'm like, oh yeah, we sell Super Loop cable guides. And they're like, no way. I'm like, no, for real. Like, we sell, front throws for like Super Loop version 3 or whatever, or a toe piece, or, it's really interesting. So it's kind of fun to hear that you saw one in the wild. I love that.
Well, and the Super Loop, of all my tooting the horn and just kind of the thing. Of course, it was the first binding to use stainless steel. It was the first binding to do an integrated tow bar. It was all just tabs, but a full tow bar across. It was the first to have adjustable cable guides. It was the first to really capture the geometry, the 75 millimeter, closer back to the ball of your foot to try to get these boots, because it was all about getting it was almost an advantage of only binding that it was not that good a skier, because I was looking for every edge I could get. And so when I figured out that you could do some things with the binding that would actually improve your ski performance, I was like all over, what do I need to do? In fact, the earliest versions of the Super Loop actually had a couple slots towards the rear near the top of the sidewall that you could put a volley strap across your toe, kind of right at the back of the toe box. And so it would force your ball of your back foot to stay on the ski, which is still, when I see guys skiing telly and stuff all the time, and I'm really psyched that Durango has such a good telly kind of presence up there on the hill. And but still, when you see guys that are real athletic, they're getting down, but what's hurting them is that they're not weighting their back foot properly, and so their back foot is actually becoming not an asset; it's becoming a liability. And especially when you get into crud and bumps and all kinds of things, groomers, you can do just about anything, especially as athletic as these guys are. But that strap across was like, holy smokes, this is big. And then we were the first binding that used a compression spring. Everything was extension springs at that point. But really the biggest concept that we brought in, we were the first to do an integrated shim, even a binding that came with a heel lift. A lot of those things were out there, but nobody had sort of just put them into a package. And I wanted to stack the deck so that my customers had the greatest chance of, liking what I sold them. But the biggest thing that I did was to get people to realize that, yes, the skis are super important. Yes, the boots are super important, but the binding is also important as a performance deal. And to show you how radical that was, the very first outdoor retailer winter show, the summer had broken off from skiing SIA a few years earlier and were doing their own summer show, but there wasn't a winter show. The very first one was actually out in Reno, Nevada. And this would have been about 89 or 90, somewhere in there. You can look it up. We were one of the few exhibitors. In fact, the whole show was just in a ballroom at a hotel that a few years later, we were back in that same hotel. And the industry reception that night was in the same ballroom. It was packed. And we were just laughing, going, this used to be the entire show, and they had a ski demo day up at Boreal Summit, and then they're real close to there is, and somebody have to remind me the name of it. It's one of the few places in America that has a 50K Nordic track that's right up in that area, so the outdoor demo, they were running shuttles between the downhill portion of Boreal Summit and the cross country. But everybody was set up their little tables at the cross country area. And I remember two big things from that. One is Dana Gleason came up there, and he'd been skiing the binding for the last 2 years, just loved it. If you know Dana, he's a big guy. And he was the one that kept encouraging me. You got something. But he looked at my price list. And he said, nope, give me those. And he literally took all my price lists that I'd printed out before I'd left. They were just on a regular sheet of paper. And there was no marketing department. and Dana took them, and he said, here, and he just scratched through all the numbers, rewrote down numbers, and said, go to whatever Kinko's or something down in Reno tonight, and you get this thing reprinted. And I'm taking these. He literally took my price list and threw them in the trash.
and he said, up the margins.
He's like, you can't make money at doing this, because he asked me. He said, "What what's it cost to put in the thing?" And so, I think it was like $24 at that point is what I had on there. And he was like, no, I think he bumped it up like 30 or something, whatever it was. So that was really, kind of a cool day. The whole show, he was just sending people over. Hey, go see. It's Rainey John. Go talk to Russell. Tell Russell I sent you over. So he was my first marketing department. But then the other seminal thing was a guy came up. It was this Norwegian contingent, and they were all wearing all the Rotafella jackets and everything. And they were, there was nothing but scowls on them as they were looking at my stuff. And I just talked to them like they were any other customer that, this is what ignorance allows you to do. I just talked to them like they were just any other people, and just give them the whole spiel and talk to them about it. And I remember when I said, this binding will improve your skiing performance. And this guy that was clearly the head of this little entourage laughed in my face. And then I found out who he was almost immediately. I kind of looked at his tag, and it was Dogfin Rag. And if anybody knows, the guy who ran Rotafella, at least their skiing operations for years, and really a kind of a visionary, was a guy named Dogfin Rag, and that was him. Huh. He was the big guy in Nordic bindings at the time, because the Rotafella was making all the bindings that Chenard was selling at the time. Yeah,
Riva 1, Riva 2, those were all Rotafella.
All that stuff. Yep. In fact, the guy that put all that ski program together for Black Diamond, he was a good friend of Von Chenard's, was a guy named Rick Liu. And Rick was the guy that came up with the first adjustable ski poles. But he's the one that he went over to Rotafella. They had some relationship with him enough that he was able to go over and look through all of their old parts. Stuff back, early 20th century, kind of thing. Literally the kind of the rat trap bindings that were even full on alpine, but they were really Nordic, if you know anything about how those bindings progress. They were cable bindings. And he picked out of some of their old tooling some pieces and some parts and kind of cobbed together this idea of the original Chenard cable binding.
Oh yeah, the red cable.
That was it, and that was Rick Liu. Well, Rick, just sell the total thing. Rick lived about 100 yards from me in Jackson Hole. Now, not at the time all this was going on. I didn't live in Jackson Hole at that time, but we ended up settling, and then I got introduced to Rick through Exum and some of the stuff. I was like, hey, where do you live? And he was like, oh, here. And I was like, no way. I said, man, I'm like 3 houses away from you, It was just crazy. Anyway, so Dogfin, like I said, just laughed in my face at this idea that the binding was part of the performance. And we got to be good friends. That's a longer story to tell how we worked on the NTN together. And if you know anything about Dogfin, had an unbelievably untimely death. Right in the middle, when we first had our first skiable prototype of the NTN, Dogfin went in for some surgery and died on the operating table, basically.
Oh my God, I did not know that.
From what I understood, it was like a reaction to the anesthesia or something. It was it was a fairly routine surgery, kind of thing. So it was that was just a real sadness, and frankly, it doomed the NTN to being just a whole lot less even today than it could have been, because there's never been a guy with vision like Dogfin had.
Wow.
So, anyway, all that to say, that was that first show, and it was literally, that show was about 6 months after we, moved to Jackson Hole, and.
Wow, that's so interesting. I want to ask you just, there's a couple technical questions I've always been curious about with when you first version. Well, here's what's funny. So I collect everything. So the only one I'm missing is version 1 of the Super Loop. And I've talked to Chris and Collins. I'm like, you guys have to dig one up somewhere. I need the bungee heel, but I will say,
okay, you're going to have to, here's how you're going to get one. You're going to have to put out to your readers, okay, there is a 25% off coupon to the first one that gets one of these in my hand.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, if anyone's listening and it actually has the and you brought up something I did not know, which is great, which is the volet strap version. If anybody has any of these Super Loops, hit me up, podcast@freeheellife.com. I would love to get some of these, because I've got what we call probably version 2, which is sort of the thinner wire with the
and it had the little compression spring
inside of the heel.
That was sort of generation 2. We had a few versions of the previous one, but there was really 3 generations of the Super Loop, and the one you're talking about was the first binding in the world that had a compression spring.
Yep.
And because what would happen not with the Super Loop that had the stretchy tubing, it would always come back to shape, but the other cable bindings, like the Chenard and some of the other ones of Olay, they just had extension springs.
Yep.
And if you know anything about a screen door, when it flies way too far open, the spring is never the same again. Well, that was as the boots got stiffer, that just kept happening more and more to the springs on the
it never goes back into shape.
It didn't happen when the boot that those bindings were designed for was being used, the lace-up leather. Just like with our Super Loop, it worked fine when it was matched with the same boot it was designed for. But the very first ones were some type of stretchy tubing, this loop, that's where the name Super Loop came around. And there were really kind of 3 versions of that. The last one worked really well. I still think it is the best binding for guys who want to do a lot of touring on lighter boots, like even some of the leather 75 millimeters that are out there now. There's still a couple of guys that make them, because the tubing, it was more like a part of your body. It was more like a muscle or a tendon. It was very organic, and it had even a little snap as it came forward. If you were doing a real diagonal stride, nobody does a diagonal stride with skins on, right? We're just shuffling up the hill. But back in the day, we would actually wax, climber wax, for stuff. And a lot of times we didn't have skins. I mean, it was just full on herringbone and sidestepping and all that kind of stuff. And so we would get to where we kick and glide. Of course, the terrain, we weren't looking for the steeps as much, because even if we got them, we couldn't ski them. And so that binding was out there. And so if you have the last one of that, it was about a 3/4 inch diameter. So we're getting close to garden hose size, stretchy tubing, black. And then the cables had a ball on the end of it that you would slide the tubing over. And then there was a worm drive hose clamp, literally like a plumbing clamp. But there's like 3 grades of those plumbing clamps. So we had ones that were actually rated to go on like jet aircraft for like hydraulic hoses and stuff, because they were super strong. And that was the ultimate version of that tubing version. Then the second version came out, and that was the one with the thinner cable and had the compression string. That one worked a lot better in some ways, and the biggest challenge we had some cable wear issues along the cable guides, because the cable guides, we were still actually just punching them out of the sidewall of the toe piece of the toe piece, so it'd be all integrated. There's nothing to fall off and all that kind of stuff. The problem was you just couldn't get the 3-dimensional shape you needed to protect that cable, and it wasn't really a cutting thing like a sharp edge. We were able to dull those edges so they wouldn't do that. It was more, they have a ratio with cables that whatever the cable diameter there's the sheave or the thing goes back and forth over. They know the diameter with which there's almost an unlimited life. You can flex it, but if you go below that diameter, it's going to break. And so, I didn't know all that at the time. And, so the last version of that one with the clamp back on the side of your outside heel, and there was very little spring travel. So if you remember that, again, for leather boots, there was enough spring travel. There was not for the plastic boots. But that one had adjustable cable guides. And then we went then I knew the next binding had to have more spring travel. Just because the Terminators were out at the time. And it was, my whole mission with the last one was survive the Terminator.
And is that where you started tucking the spring into the front throw?
Yeah, so it became part of the front throw. So we abandoned the throw on the back of the heel and moved the throw up forward, which also made it easier to get on. And then just refine the toe piece. We integrated in the shim, underneath the thing, and that's the version. And the final version of that, actually, you have, because the colors were the same as the first generation of the Hammerhead. It was that blue with kind of the orange, and part of the reason was we found a plastic, and we're still Chris. That's a longer story how Chris and I got together, but that was just a really fun deal. I met Chris when he was 10 years old, climbing the Grand Teton. And but the plastic that we pioneered for the Hammerhead and then immediately also put it in the Super Loop was just to give you an idea. So I started working with GE. GE is one of the big plastic makers. And it was just a crazy set of coincidences allowed me to they have their own kind of little skunk works department that's always working on these latest plastic projects for unsolvable riddles for plastic.
Did you say GE?
Yeah, General Electric.
Oh, wow. Okay,
yeah,
keep going.
Yeah, no, they're they were the largest corporation on earth at that time, and they had a plastics division, and they also, as a lot of people know, they make jet engines. I mean, GE does a lot more than make refrigerators. But they had this division, and they were primarily working on plastics that their manufacturing of all their different products needed, because they couldn't find a plastic that would do it. And the ultimate sort of challenge in plastics is what they call notch sensitivity. And so it basically means wherever there is a hole in the plastic, whether it was put in at the time of molding or drilled as a secondary operation, or there was a change in shape, like think of an L shape, kind of right in that corner of the L. Those are all notches, they're known as in the thing. And that's where plastics usually crack and break. And then when you add cold weather to it, cold weather notch sensitivity is the holy grail of plastics. Well, these guys had just started kind of cracking the nut at a factor of 10 over even their best plastics. And that was about the time a guy introduced me to them. Turns out they loved me, and didn't love me. They loved what we were, because we were a small company that could implement a total new plastic without years and years of market research and liability research and all kinds of stuff that their bigger customers would have to go through. And so they were willing to send me bags of this totally like top secret plastic that they were working on. And then we would mold it and then, see how it worked. And I'd send them parts. And then if parts would break, I'd send it to them. The way I finally figured out how to torture test plastic was I would take the part, wrap a towel around it. I'd have an ice chest. I'd put a block of dry ice down, lay the part in the towel on the block of dry ice, cover it with another block of dry ice, and soak it in that cooler for 48 hours. And then I would pull it out of there very quickly, set it on the concrete floor, and smash it with a sledgehammer. Now, just to let you know, the best plastics of the day, I could just tap them with the sledgehammer. And these are ones that we were going to market with, and they were still better than a lot of what other people were using. I would just tap it with a sledgehammer. It would break into more parts than a piece of glass would break into.
Wow.
It was just, there. The first time I hit this plastic, and I still can't tell you what the plastic is, I hit this plastic in GE. The hammer bounced back up and almost hit me in the forehead.
Wow.
And then I hit it again, and then I got 2 hands on it. And I was like, okay, we got something here. And the part was completely deformed from all the beating, but it never cracked. And I was like, okay, here we go. Now, here's the reason that if I told you plastic, nobody else is going to use it. And it's one of the reasons that, I just finally got to where our bindings cost what they cost. Because I was able to put more money into the raw materials and the processes and the parts, more money in the box than any of our competitors were selling the entire binding for wholesale. And that was just the way I wanted to do it. I mean, if it was something better, it was like, I want this. I want something better. I don't want crap breaking on me, and I don't want my customers crap breaking on me. So the best engineering grade plastics of the day, which most of them are nylon derivatives, were around $4 to $5 a pound back then. Don't know what they are now. Of course, they've gone up, but they're about $4.50 a pound. This experimental plastic from GE was $18 a pound.
Wow, that's significant.
Oh yeah, really significant. Anyway, so that was why as soon as I found it and I was putting it into production for the Hammerhead, I was like, well, let's just put it in production because it was compatible with the molds we had. If people that end up molding, when you shoot a plastic part into a mold, it's warm, obviously, like most things are warm. It's a little larger and then cold. So there's the shrinking after, so it goes into the mold, let's say 400 or 500 degrees, and then it cools down to obviously room temperature, and there's a certain amount of shrinkage both in transverse and longitudinal direction, and you have to calculate all that in the molds. Otherwise, the part comes out and it's not the right shape. Either it didn't shrink enough or it shrunk too much. Well, it just so happened that the shrinking of this new plastic was almost identical to what we had designed the molds for. So we were able to put it immediately into production, and so I don't know which color you had. Everything before that was a black front throat.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to hit on too is, so I just don't want to forget this because this is a question I've had for you for way longer, like forever, is what was your intention with the options? Because in those super loop, there's multiple holes for where you can put the cable guide.
Yeah.
And obviously, was the intention to change the pivot point?
It was primarily because it's not something you do in the field. In fact, the best one we got, which never broke, the ski edges, it was actually a piece of hardened stainless steel, which was real expensive. That's what the ultimate cable guide with the little plastic inserts in it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep, totally.
Well, the outside, because what would happen is, of all the ski edges, especially if it was an aluminum binding, the ski edges would just wear those things down. So that hardened thing was just impervious to, those hardened steel ski edges. And so that became later down the line, but it was never field replaceable. I did have one early version with the integrated toe piece where the cable guide was more of just a hook shape, kind of a downward hook kind of thing with a little kind of rocker to it. I had 2 at one point, so you could just hook it under the back one or hook it under the front one kind of thing. It never really worked well. I actually never made a production version of that because I had a lot of problems. But I love the idea more than anything about boot size, because my wife's got like a size 5 foot. I've got a 12. And so the same binding with her boot in it skied differently than it did with my boot in it. And I wanted those cable guides back as far as they could go to help people, again, get the boot flexing properly. And by this time, the Terminators are out. And the biggest challenge with the Terminators, and they'll tell you this, was trying to get, and they would talk about getting the bellows right and getting everything around the bellows right, because it was all about getting it to flex properly, more like a leather boot. As far as being able to use the back of your foot or the ball of your back foot. Because what you immediately started seeing when the Terminators came out was this turn that was really the only turn you could do outside of my bindings, that unless you were super skilled already, you just came up on the toe of your back foot, and it got to be coined in the industry, especially among us tele instructors, as a fake mark.
Because you were like tippy toe because you couldn't engage the bellow.
And the way you know that you're doing it is go ski whatever you can ski on a groomer, right? And then go ski in some crud. And the difference in those two abilities will tell you how poorly you're using your back foot. Because if you're using it properly, there should be definitely less than a 10% difference in what you can ski. But you see people out there that it's a 90% different. They literally can't even get down the crud, but they're ripping down the groomers. Well, they're just skiing on they're just skiing on one foot, but you can't do that in the crud. So it's a self-diagnostics. I'll challenge people to, and I'll give my best tip for that. There was always this, and Dickie Hall was even kind of a leader in this thought around teaching tele. And the thought, and I got to be where this is what when I'd go ski with a new student, and I'd just go do a run first. I didn't believe in the some people's school of thought where you give like a 30-minute lecture about how you do a telemark turn before you ever see them make a telemark turn. I was like, no, we're going to go ski. And then I'm going to make some evaluations about what's the one thing, because you can't work on two things. You don't work on one thing. What's the one thing that's going to improve their skiing the most? And so I got to where I was always wanting to ask myself this question: should they be thinking, I'm stepping forward into my telemark turn, or I'm stepping back into my telemark turn? And you think about that for a second. You guys go get on the snow and try that, and you realize it seems semantics, but it's not. If you'll really commit to I'm stepping back or I'm stepping forward, it's two different ways to initiate the turn, and it's huge. And so when somebody's doing a fake mark or they're not using the back heel properly, the answer is almost always step back. Mm-hmm. Because what that does is get you to engage that back ski properly. Now, once your back ski is engaged, your own survival instinct has a hard time letting go of that back ski's engagement. If you step forward and you don't try to engage the back ski until you're sort of in a challenging spot, you won't abandon that front foot to go to the back foot, which is what you should do, but you won't do it. It's just psychologically impossible. And so that's sort of the whole deal. But that was the reason for the adjustable cable bindings. And then, of course, we put that all the way onto the Hammerhead, and I made the Hammerhead where, in the right place, not at 20 below in the middle of a snowstorm, but in the right place, you could, in the field, adjust your cable guides. In fact, what I would do, because a lot of times it would be like a long approach, and then we're starting to climb up. For the approach and for the climb up, I literally would take my 4 cable guides out of my hammer and just put them in my pocket. And that was position 0, I called it. And then
it's like early free pivot touring right there.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. In fact, it was if you'd loosen the cable, a little bit, and take those cable guides out, it was amazingly free pivot. And then, I'd get to where we were either I knew I was about to get in a place like, okay, I'm about to get up in some steep terrain, and the last thing I want to be doing up there is trying to put my cable guides back in. So I'd stop at sort of the last, comfortable spot, put the cable guides back in, and finish the climb with those. So I was ready to rip skins and come down, or if I was just booting up the last bit. And then I would put them in the back position for mine because I had a size 12, and that's what got the boot, flexing properly.
It's super interesting because honestly, it's cool to hear your description of it, because nowadays I look at what you created with the 5 pivot positions on the Hammerhead. Obviously, it went back to super loop, which it took me a while looking at the couple pairs on my wall, and I was like, no way. He was already thinking about it back then. Then to hear you put a volet strap in it to engage the ball of the foot, that's even more fascinating now. But once the plastic boots came out, the volley strap was really no match. Right. For the plastic, so it didn't help that much. But for the leather boots, especially again, a guy like me that didn't ski that great, it was. I remember having my first sort of gonzo term where I felt like just going, and I was able to get through some stuff, and it was all because of that strap. And I still had the stretchy rubber tubing on it. Yeah. Well, and what's fascinating to me is now in 2022, those pivot positions on a hammerhead are really truly, they've become a guide point for us in terms of understanding people that are coming from, a Rainey hammerhead, 22 Designs hammerhead that had the 5 positions. Those people tend to be easy to identify sort of the feel that they're experiencing just from a conversation. Yep. Because we can take the boot that they're using and say, oh, okay, you're on this generation of a Scarpa T1 or a T2, and you're on position 2, on a hammerhead. We know that it's a much more, someone that's used to a neutral feel versus a more active feel, like a position 4 or 5. And right. So it's actually, those people tend to be easier to guide into the NTN products nowadays.
You're right. Yep.
Because what's so interesting is people that are skiing on like position 4, for instance, on a hammerhead, it's a little like they're not really jumping, even though that binding, we're talking that binding's over 20 years old now, so
it is. It's like 22 years old.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, but if someone's on position 4 on a hammerhead from 2000, it's almost like you can say, okay, like we're jumping a couple decades into an NTN product that doesn't have movable pivot point, but we kind of know how to guide them. Someone coming from a cable binding of a similar vintage, like from Volet G3, circa 1999, 2000, whatever. Those people have a really difficult time transitioning to something that has a more aggressive pivot point. So that's why I always that's why I've wanted to have this conversation so long. 'Cause I'm like, how did he come up with that? It's had a long lasting impact,
It's one of the things I think was an advantage, that I wasn't a great skier. There, one of the other guys that I got to spend a lot of time with and just love and just think he's been such a great pioneer, Paul Parker. Paul was one of the purest skiers you would have ever met, long before he ever got into like ski equipment. And so that's not to take anything away from him, but I'm saying when you're out there fighting for your own survival and trying to make, if somebody would say, well, that's cheating, I'd be going, damn right, but I'm surviving. And so, whatever it would take kind of thing. I didn't have a purist mindset. I had a survival mindset. And the active, what you kind of describe is what got to be known as active bindings versus passive bindings. One of my great friends and people that don't know that we owe still a lot to him in the industry, Mitch Weber, who forever ran the Telemark Tips website. Mitch really in that sort of think tank that was Telemark Tips, really came up with the active binding, because there was always binding flame wars going on at the time and stuff, which I'm not on social media now, and I didn't like it then, kind of thing. But if folks don't know, Mitch passed from cancer a few years ago, and just one of the sweethearts of the sport. And I got to be great friends over the years, still am, with Craig Dostey, and when Craig showed up at that first winter outdoor retailer up there at Boreal Summit, he was still living in Southern California and printing, literally printing off his printer, and then he moved to newsprint, for Couloir magazine, way back then. And but that was we would all get together and just geek out on all that stuff. But that was sort of the deal. And then the NTN, one of the things that, when Dogfin and I talked about sort of working together on the NTN, by that point, and I love this, by that point, Dogfin was not only have we gotten to be friends and respected, and each other. He would sell me, like, they had some great screws that we needed for the hammerhead, and anyway, it's a long story about getting custom screws made. Anyway, they had a perfect screw, and I thought, well, there's no way he's going to sell me screws. I'm his competitor. And he was like, absolutely, how many you want? And gave me a great price on them, like cheaper than I could have got them made. And I asked him after, a year doing that, I saw him show, I said, what I just got to ask, man, why are you selling me screws and stuff? Your competitor. He said, I watch what you do. I respect what you do, and I learn from what you do. And that was about the time this idea of the NTN. In fact, I was because I obviously knew the NNN and all that kind of stuff. And when we were having our first talk, I said, well, what are we going to call this, kind of project? And he said, well, we're talking about this or that. And it was like, I said, well, guys already have the name. Why don't we just call it the NTN? He's like, perfect, we'll do that. And so but part of the idea, we had that kind of stacked hands real early on about what this thing would be, or we weren't going to bring it to market. Unfortunately, we didn't get all the way there because of his untimely death. But one of the built-in things is because the flex point is so determined by that, back duckbill, that you could easily put that in a different spot on the on the boot, right? So you could have it closer forward for the small feet, farther back for the bigger feet, and so it's kind of baked in a proper flex point, as long as the binding, could adjust up and maybe adjust spring tension on that. But we had said that we would not bring one to market that wasn't fully step in, and most importantly, releasable. Mm-hmm. And it was just, there was no even thought that we would get to something that wasn't that, because we both saw that as the biggest long-term, because the tech bindings were starting to, happen at that time and that kind of thing. And it was like, look, it's, they're doing, and it should be, right. What it should be, and it's going to go because of this. And Tele's just going to keep falling farther and farther behind. And then the ultimate death knell of Tele is going to be if the boot manufacturers stop making the boots, because you can get a binding together, with a pretty low capital budget. You can't make a boot with a low capital budget. You're talking millions for boot molds and that kind of thing. And so, that's always been the ultimate threat to teleskiing, is the boot manufacturers just say, it's not a big enough market. But back to the NTN, the basically what people are skiing today is our first skiable prototype.
Oh, interesting. So it's sort of like it didn't quite evolve to the point that you guys had discussed.
I had one meeting at the OR show that year after Dogfin died with the new guy. And just, I'm sure the guy's incredible in all kinds of ways, but visionary for the future of teleskiing was not it. And he just said, we're taking this to market. And I said, you can't do that, Dogfin. He's like, there was just, of course I couldn't stop him. But and then he got, because of Rotofella name, he got the boot manufacturers, on board. And it could have been so much more. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And so so you guys were talking NTN in the 90s, correct?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so,
we were both old stuff together. The one thing Dogfin realized was I was really good at taking a boot and just turning it into from Frankenboot. I learned that early on for guys like Dickie Hall and some of these others that were taking cuffs off of Alpine boots and putting them on their Merrill, whatever the tallest one is at the time, and that eventually kind of became the Merrill Super Comp, which was the first boot that you could buy with a plastic cuff. Well, for at least 10 years, people were putting plastic cuffs on leather boots. And so I was like, you can, outside of seeing somebody do that, I don't know if I would have thought, yeah, you can modify a boot, but you can. In fact, my favorite Tele boots is a pair of Garmont Excursions. And if you guys don't remember that, of course, Garmont's the Scotch now. The Garmont Excursion was basically the T4. It was their touring boot, but that was more of my roots and what I wanted to ski. And I'd gotten to be a good enough skier. I could ski down a lot of stuff. I did several first descents in the Tetons. The last 12,000 foot peak that was unskied in the Tetons, Mount Thor, Tom Turiano, and I, and a couple other guys, we did the first descent of it. I was the only one on telegear. And it was in these excursions. Well, I took these excursions. First of all, I did what a lot of people do. I put an Intuition liner down in there. And I cut the duckbill toe off because you didn't need that, especially in my bindings. And then I took the front sole off the Tele boot and resoled it with 510 dot rubber, sticky rubber. like they do on their guide tennies and stuff. And
like for scrambling and stuff, or what?
Oh, I guided up to 590 in those boots. And
that's legit, dude.
Yeah, and they would, ski in them and stuff. So because we were pushing the envelope, out there for a while, and then some of the guys just went to a level that I just, I couldn't do, and if for nothing else, and with family at home. So anyway, but that's, that was kind of the deal. So it was real easy for me to just drill through back in the back, put some T-nuts, on the inside of the boot, coming down the other way, and then put different cleats on there, different positions, trying to, come up with the back duckbill for the, for the NTN, and then would even send, I'd do something, I'd show it to, Dogfin at the show kind of thing. And if he, kind of liked it or whatever, thought it was a step in the right direction, I'd just give him the pair of boots because I'd go make another one. Because I had a full 21st century tool and die shop. Ultimately, at the end, what really worked out is I was art to part. So I was the guy out there coming up with what I thought was needed next, either to fix a problem or move things forward. Had a lot of input from these incredible customers I mentioned earlier, the guide buddies, but it was kind of me seeing the need and deciding, okay, we're going to go for that. And not a marketing department, not even a hired sponsored athlete that could, give that feedback. And then I would design it, and then I would prototype it. I'm literally making all these things. I'm doing the CAD work. I'm doing the machine work. I build the injection molds for it. I would even sometimes do small production runs if it was, something that worked that way. And all of that happened, kind of under just my maniacal control of whatever standards I set them to be. And they may not have been the standards of other manufacturers. They may not have been the right ones. They might not have been what every customer would want, but it was the standards that I thought that were right at that moment for that product. And so I was when you have all these layers of disconnect between the original vision and felt need to the product on the store shelf, all the way down to the color and stuff, there was, there's just a disconnect. And that's why some of my early bindings, you got them on your walls, you can see they were 100% utilitarian, right? There was not even an afterthought given to what it would look like on a store shelf or on a ski. Didn't care.
You definitely set the tone for in that industrial vibe that 22 Designs has kind of continued on. It's useful. It's not necessarily like the cosmetic, fancy shiny thing. But
I did,
it works.
Like even the first Hammerhead, when I came up with the name, I'd had this cable that came down both sides, went under the foot, the whole deal, and we kind of pioneered that whole way that worked. And even in that, I would say I didn't pioneer, the old famous Newton quote. Isaac Newton said that if I've seen farther than others, it's because I've been standing on the shoulders of giants. And I would say if there was anything that I saw a little bit around the corner, it was because of that same reason. One of my favorite places to mine ideas, to at least consider, was to go back and look at the early 20th century. I'm talking like in the 1910s, patents for ski bindings. And because there was some really cool stuff that I never even saw examples of out on the market, but there was ideas and things in there. So anyway, that was, what I wanted was to work. Well, I made the Hammerhead, and one day I looked down. This was the prototype, and I never had more than one prototype at a time because I was always skiing with whatever my current production model was on one foot and the next hoped for product on the other foot. And I remember I went to Snow King. It was early in the season. All they had was a little pile of man-made snow that they had kicked down with the snowcat. And I just hiked up to it. I mean, it was literally maybe 200 yards. And at Snow King, it's good and steep. But I made like 3 turns with the first generation Hammerhead. I mean, just the cob together prototype on my right foot, and my current and my latest version of the Super on my left foot. I made like 3 turns and I stopped and went, holy crap, I just made the Super Loop obsolete. because of the way it got the boot to flex. And of course, it was plastic boots at this time. And the way those two cables and that little fitting up at the front that held the cables apart, I looked down and went, that guy looks like a Hammerhead. And it was real squarish at the time. It was very block looking. And I got the Hammerhead ready. I mean, I literally was ready to put it in a box and put it out for sale. And I hit pause because we were doing good with the Super Loop. Super Loop was by volume selling more bindings than at the performance end than any other tele binding in the country. And so we were doing well, and I was like, I didn't have to go. In fact, I was even a little nervous. It was like, I put this Hammerhead out, the Super Loop's dead. And as soon as people ski it. And I had worked, long story, but I worked with this great engineer, but even better industrial designer down in the Boulder area on a project I'd been asked by some friends in the industry to work on. And I did. It was not skiing in the skiing industry. It was actually bike valves for hydration packs. And it was Dana Gleason. I would do stuff for Dana anyway. So I won't go into all the whole thing, but we just loved each other, still do. But I got to know this guy. And so I went to him, showed him this thing, and I said, look, I want to see if we can make this thing look good. Like actually have shelf appeal. Never cared about it, but I care. I think we'll try. And so we went back, we did a full redesign on every part of the Hammerhead, a little bit for function. He was a super good engineer, so he actually helped me in a couple of places, just refine some stuff. Whether I ever would have found those, I don't know, but he definitely, was smart in that way. But he took that Hammerhead concept and went all the way through it, all the way, the heel throw, had the little notch in the tail, just like a Hammerhead shark that had no function to it. And so then we brought it to market, and still questioning, was this because it cost a lot of money? I had to redo all the tools, all the injection molds, all that stuff to do this. And I remember that first OR where I showed the thing, and there were literally people coming around to just pet the binding. Like look at it and pet it. Didn't even want me to tell them about it. They just wanted one on their pair of skis because it looked awesome. And it was a completely different experience for me, because I'd never had anything that people wanted to look at, much less touch. And I was like, that was probably a good idea. This
has got to be like 1999, somewhere in there.
Yeah, no, that would have been around 2000.
2000. Yeah. I mean, you think of what was, and that's what's so fascinating is you think what was out at the time. The Targhee had just come out in 99, and then Hammerhead comes out. You've got a 6-hole mounting pattern, super burly. You've got multiple pivot positions. Which, by the way,
I offered that whole pattern. I made sure that whole pattern would work with every other binding on the market, Volet, Rotafella, G3, if they wanted to incorporate it into their product.
Well, your dream's coming true sooner than later. I'm telling you.
Well, everyone's having problems with. Yeah, everyone was having problems with the holes right now, but nobody wanted to make that jump, and there were several reasons. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh no, I would say nowadays, I mean, it's taken over 20 years, but I think the 6-hole Hammerhead pattern is almost industry, but like it probably will be industry standard if it's not already. I think that's where it's headed. People, BD added 2 holes eventually on the 01, and I mean, there's a lot of interesting history there, but that's what's so interesting. When I look back, I mean, that's almost 23 years ago you're talking about, and it's like it really, really was ahead of its time. I mean, the underfoot cable routing, the size of the spring. I mean, my goal was that a size 12 Terminator, you could put your knee on the front of the ski and not bottom out the spring. Right, because
even with six screws in there, as soon as there's no elasticity, something's going wrong.
Well, yeah, look at Pitbull, mid 90s. Pitbull, I mean, you were literally launching springs out the front, and then tearing the binding out and look, stuff like that.
I had my share. I don't want to talk about anybody else's challenges. We were all doing the best we could, and but it is interesting how the things that we put in, like compression springs, stainless steel toe piece, cables under the deal, even the idea that the binding could help you with the performance of your ski turns. I look back on those and go, those are all things that we brought to the market first, and with some pride in that. And the whole thing, imitation is the finest form of flattery. And I refuse to get anything patent. So I'm one of these, kind of Luddites to some extent in that, because I never really felt like the ideas that I had were mine. And I felt like as soon as I took ownership of them and said, these are mine, that, I don't know what that's the source of the idea is, what I thought about that. And so I thought, just keep innovating, just keep innovating, just keep innovating. And so, we saw people that were putting ideas out into the marketplace that were my best ideas 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's,
and that, that was fine, sort of validated it. I will say there was another fortuitous, crazy thing that really helped the Hammerhead. The year, okay, so this would have been, so now I know the dates now. So this had been fall 2001 when we shipped the Hammerhead. Okay, so that's the day. We had a test team, which was another fun thing that we did in the 2000s. So it was a prototype that we sold to a certain test team at full price, $250. The highest price binding of that day was the Super Loop at like 120. So it was over double the price. And all I made the promise was that if we made 200 of them, and I was selling them at full retail, even industry people, full retail. And the only promise I made was that if there was anything we improved the next year because of their feedback, I would send them any parts that were necessary to bring it up to the latest, greatest at no charge. And they'd get a year advance on everybody else. Well, that testing was the best marketing thing we ever did. And it was the only T-shirt or swag thing. We never did a sticker, never did a T-shirt. We did one T-shirt in the entire history of Rainey Designs, and that was the Hammerhead test team T-shirt. And when they got there the next fall, when we sent out, and there was only one part that survived from that testing binding to the final one. There was only one part, and it was the stainless steel heel tube that you screw into.
Oh, wow.
And so I sent everybody a brand new binding, sans the ski tube, because what that did was I knew those bindings that weren't quite right, they wouldn't be used because they have to use that tubing on the new one that was. But I sent all that to those guys, and made good on my promise, but I also had in there a testing T-shirt for everybody. And so that fall, in between those two, I had worked on, we were about to go into production, and a forest fire hit right up near our house in Wilson, Wyoming, to the point where they evacuated us out of our house for 2 months, told us, you're not going to see it again. Well, that was everything we had, my shop, tools, our house, our lives. And they gave us 2 hours to get out. Well, I had literally finished less than 48 hours before we got evacuated. I had finished 2 pairs of the production binding. And that was it. And I just said, I'm going to throw those skis in the car because I don't want to lose these. And we went down after a couple of days of basically watching our house try to burn down. We're down the valley floor of Wilson looking up every afternoon. It blows up. Everything disappears in the smoke. And I figured out how to know if our house was still there, because back then everybody had answering machines. And I would call my answering machine
and see if it worked.
If it picked up, my house is still there. And I spread that. We'd all meet down at the school, Wilson School, to meet with the fire bosses, and they kind of tell us what was going on. And I started telling people, the call my answer machine's working. So we all started calling each other's answer machines to see if their house was going. And after about 2 days of doing that, I'm just getting physically sick kind of watching this. And so I told my son, I said, you want to go skiing? And sure, he was always up for skiing. And so we threw that stuff in, what little bit we had. And I called up a couple of buddies, just happened to be Craig Dostey, Mitch Weber, who brought along Big Tim, who was his sidekick, another great guy, and Dave, and I'm going to forget Dave's last name, sorry Dave, who was doing a ski magazine at Pacific Northwest. In fact, I think he still does a little something with it. You remember what I'm talking about?
Vaguely.
Great guy.
Oh, Wag? Dave Wag, I think? W-A-A-G?
I think so.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah, okay.
So these are the three sort of voices in teleskiing now. Call them up, and it's all or nothing. I mean, if this thing just blows up, it's not going to be good for our PR, but it was like, let's go give it a try. Got Josh, and I've still got the lift tickets from August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd up on Mount Hood. We just drove from Jackson Hole straight to Mount Hood. August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2001. This is just a few weeks before 9/11.
Wow.
And these guys came up skiing, and there was first run down on the Hammerheads. These guys were like, "This is different. This is something different." And then there was actually a couple that was teleskiers, and the lady was actually a pretty good teleskier. The guy was just learning. He was horrible, but it was just his first day on teleski. And I can't remember who had the idea. I think it was Mitch said, but it could have been Dostey's, whoever it was. It was a great idea. Said, hey, let's get this guy on a Hammerheads and just see the deal. And they even took some video before and after. He all of a sudden could ski. I mean, he was literally like making a turn, falling, picking his, laying on his back, and his skis flopped around. All of a sudden, the next run, he'd done that for like 2 runs. We'd watched him. And the next run, he skied the thing top to bottom. That was just kind of a groomer blue run with corn snow. So it wasn't that difficult, but he skied it top to bottom like he'd been tellying for quite a while. And all those guys were just, they were like, this binding just changed the sport. And started immediately, putting stuff in the press, doing the whole thing. Well, that just, kicked the Hammerhead into the next level. And then we had all this goodwill from the test team and stuff. So in the end, I figured out a little bit about, marketing as far as, first of all, make the thing look sexy, and then, get some good PR out ahead of you. None of those things are instinctual to me. Because I'm just asking, but did you like the way it skied? But that's some great memories.
No, I love that. One of the things too, I actually came across an old article that kind of plays into right around that time with the Hammerhead is one. I mean, it sounded like you had gone direct to customer at some point. Yep. And then the more interesting part about that, having done retail the last 8 years myself, and is that you started doing well, at least according to the article, you can tell me if it's correct, but it sounded like you then decided, okay, well, I need these retailers, but you really had a sense of loyalty to specific retailers in geographic areas. And so it sounded like you didn't really want to spread, you weren't trying the shotgun approach. Okay, I'll just sell 2 bindings to every shop within 100 miles of each other. You were like, okay, I'm going to give this loyalty to this particular shop to sell my bindings so that they can offer a high level of service. I mean, can you kind of hit on that?
Yeah, and I'll give the guy credit for really sort of pulling me in that direction and solidifying it. One of the great guys in the industry, Greg, who owns Bentgate Mountaineering in Golden, Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
You probably come across him over
for
the years.
Sure.
One of the classiest, just men of integrity that I've ever met. Just an amazing guy. And he'd been a good customer for years. And we went direct for a couple of reasons. And if you look at the time, somebody said good things now, that's no big deal. Nobody had done that. I mean, even the big retailers that were being sold online, like Patagonia and things like that, were years away from selling anything direct themselves, because obviously the retailers are going to be upset if you start selling direct to their customers. And there wasn't Amazon, there was all kinds of stuff. If you look how little online retailing was happening back then, most shops didn't have a presence online. And so for me, Rainey Designs was always a lifestyle business. That term didn't exist back then. It does now. I think people get it, especially after COVID and all this. And I went to my wife, and we just kind of sat down, and she was always my business partner. I mean, we laughed at, I make messes business-wise, and my wife cleans them up because she's a phenomenal manager and stays on top of things and, the whole deal. And she realized even early on, she's going, when people wouldn't pay you and things like that, she said, look, you can't be the Mr. Nice Guy and ask for the orders and then be the hard ass when it's time to say, you guys need to pay your bill or you're going to go on COD, which we always hated to have to do. But, there was a few consistent folks. So she didn't have a hard time telling people how to calculate the cabbage. And we would have a couple of retailers who were famous that they would, literally it'd be 6 months overdue. And then we'd get a check from them and we'd just laugh. We'd go, yep, within 30 days, they're going to place an order. Because they didn't want to place the extra order on COD, so they'd finally pay us, so we'd ship them out on terms again. And then the same cycle would go over. Anyway, that kind of stuff. But typically in the industry, you're getting everybody, or at least the significant people, wanted bindings in their shop for the Labor Day sales. One of the biggest ones was Gary Neptune at Neptune Mountaineering in Boulder there. And I have huge respect for Gary, just a pioneer in the outdoor industry, an amazing guy just in his own right. Always want to spend time with Gary. It's just great. But he needed, because they had this big famous parking lot sale, where they sell like a gear swap kind of thing. And anyway, so you would have to have your production done by, basically the end of August. And with shipping and everything, it really needed to be August 15th. Well, by the time when I tell my different vendors who would produce my parts or different things that, that I'm ready, I'd have to order about 90 days beforehand, because one of your suppliers every year, even if for 10 years they've been on time, one of them, and you never know which one, is going to ship you at least 30 days late. So you had to bake in, that kind of thing. Whatever the part, you never know what it was going to be, but every year it was going to be one. And you can't. It's like a mousetrap. It's irreducible complexity. If one piece is missing, it ain't a ski binding. So we would literally have to go around the 1st of June and borrow more than $1 million from the bank to buy all these parts. And then we would have to assemble them, and then we would ship them. And because of the ski industry and the wholesale side, it worked on what's known as dating. You know what this is. Mm-hmm. And so you would get stuff early, and there would be certain discounts tied. Like if you paid in 90 days, you'd get a 10% discount maybe. And then if you paid in 120 days, you get a 5% discount. If you paid in, whatever, you just pay whatever the bill was. You wouldn't get a discount, but we were the bank for you for a while. And so about half of our customers, even on good terms, weren't going to pay us to around April 1st, just kind of the way the industry goes. And then you got your late ones, and they finally get in. So it's about May 1st at best that even where your cash flow is for the last 12 months. And so you got about 30 days that you kind of can look at your bank balance and go, hey, we got a little money in the bank. And then you go start the cycle all over again.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're just floating, you're paying interest and floating money for 11 months, and other people are using you. And then the other thing got to where the first generation of owners of outdoor shops were without exception, I didn't know any exceptions to this, were enthusiasts in their own right, whatever it might be. They may have been a whitewater enthusiast or a climbing enthusiast or a ski, but they were just avid enthusiasts, so much so that they were stupid enough to open their own retail store. I say that
nothing's changed.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you could preach that sermon. They would do that, and then what had happened kind of around that 2000 was a lot of these guys were kind of where I am now, like kind of long in the tooth. And the shops are doing well. If they stayed in business that long, by this point, it's 20, 30, even 40 years, some of these shops. If they stayed in business that long, they're doing well. And they got employees on the floor now. And the quality employees, and again, there's exceptions all over, but the bulk of the employees, two things that happen in those shops. The money makers for those shops is almost exclusively soft goods. That's just where the money is. That's the problem with guys that make stuff like me that would last for years and years and years. Well, how's a shop keep making money, right? You sold somebody a binding 10 years ago. Well, but clothes, they can come out with the new color for this year. And people are like, oh yeah, I need the new chinchilla this year. And so obviously if that's what's butter in your bread, you kind of put more and more, not only resources, but the staff is trained on the clothing and the technical features, but they're not necessarily outdoor enthusiasts anymore, especially when you start getting more hardcore sports like tellying and stuff. And so, and the shop employees used to be the goal. I mean, you would practically give, like, employee discounts are way below wholesale, or they were. And you would, if an employee was even hard up, it's like, I'll just give you one, just so when people say, hey, what do I need for binding? You would at least know about our product. And so, and when I would come to town and do demo days, I was always setting a day, even if I have to buy them lift tickets, where I would take the key shop employees out skiing and make sure, they're into it. Well, all that had just sort of disappeared. And then it just became about dating. It came even, well, I don't think your color matches this year's skis, so we're going to go a little heavier in this company's binding because their color does, and had nothing to do with function. And it was just, and again, there was great shops out there, but the bulk of them were not. And then the whole dating, and they're just, the whole thing. And again, it was a lifestyle business. So I got Cheryl down and I said, look, what do we need, for our quality of life, just money wise? Okay, how many bindings would we have to sell at wholesale to get there? Because you had reps at this point, you had distributors, you had all this kind of stuff. Everybody gets a percentage. We had 500 dealers in 21 countries at that heyday.
Wow.
And I said, and then we did the calculations, and I would only have to sell one binding in 7 to make the same amount of money going direct. And I looked down, and the number came out really close to a round number, which was 1,000 bindings. I said, all right, here, we're going to do this. And you're talking about rolling the dice. I mean, this is our livelihood. And I just said, we're going to make 1,000 hammerheads. We'll let people know when we're out, and we're going to go direct only. And so that's how it started. And the rumors that started going around, like I remember one rumor from one noted shop, I'm not going to say anything about who it was. It's a real known shop. Those rumors, I had customers come that when they go and ask the shop about Rainey Designs binding, they said, yeah, they don't make those anymore. Russell died.
Oh, wow. Wow. And that was like,
and then I heard another shop, I don't know if to pick up the same rumor story, I know that I died in another one of them. I died in an avalanche, one I died in a climb and fall. And I'm just kind of laughing, going, what in the world? And there were some people that had some hard feelings, and I got to say, they were never our best shops anyway. They were the guys that kind of were always jerking us around, and then they were upset, kind of deal. But I tried to just take the high road and stuff. And then I had Greg from Bentgate call me up one day. He said, we just kind of caught up a little bit and the whole thing. He says, I really take pride in that. We do whatever it takes to get our customers the best product they can. And if we don't sell it, I send them down the road because, the product our competitor has that we don't sell is actually better for your needs. And that was just, it's still to this day is his philosophy. If you want to get advice, go to the Bentgate. They'll get you fixed up first, and they may sell you something second. He said, when people ask me, what's the best binding? They're getting, telly boots, telly skis, or whatever skis they're going to get. And what's the best binding? He said, I have to tell them the best binding is a binding I can't sell, because I can't in good conscience recommend anybody to ski anything other than a Hammerhead. And he said, and I said, well, I really appreciate that. He said, I'm sorry I kind of put you in this position. And he said, it's what about this? What if I just ordered 10 bindings from you at full retail? Of course, he already had me at hello. and I said, well, and he said, what I'll do is if somebody just wants to buy it off the shelf from me out of convenience, I'll just mark it up 10% to kind of cover my handling. But if they buy a whole ski package, I'll sell them to them for exactly what I paid you for it. Not making any money, but again, I mount it for them, I give service, all that kind of stuff, which is, again, just their DNA. And I said, dude, you're welcome to do it. And well, he ordered, I don't know, probably 70 bindings maybe that winter, just in orders of 10. He just kept ordering them. He actually ordered bigger than that towards the end because I actually called him up. I said, man, we're getting down to like last 100. He said, all right, let me have this. And I told Cheryl, I said, we need to come up with a program that these great shops, we could do something with them. And so the program we came up with is if you ordered 100 pairs minimum, and you literally sent the order in with a check, then I'd give you a full margin. And, everybody in the retail biz knows what the full margin is. And so, is what we'd always done. And and we had about 10 shops that winter took us up on it. And they were all great shops. And so that was sort of the start of that program. Like I said, Greg was the one that kind of just put it in our mind and hearts to do something like that. And we loved that. And it was great. It was fun to deal with them. And that way I wasn't out money. They loved it because they got somewhat of an exclusive. And that was where you got back to the exclusive. We'd never done an exclusive before, but I said, if you do that, I'm not going to open up another shop right in your neighborhood. So for me, Bent Gate was the whole Front Range. I wasn't even like Golden and Boulder could have another one. It was like, nope, we're doing it. We'll do it with you. So it's a long story.
No, I love that. That's amazing. All right. Before we wrap up, this has been amazing. I love hearing all these deep dives. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to touch on, I've had Chris Valiante on here to talk about sort of the start of 22 designs. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of, just kind of hear from your perspective, sort of just to give us a little bit of a timeline of when you transitioned out of the ski business. And, I think if I remember the story correctly, Chris interned for you, and part of that was sort of building the Hammerhead.
It was the uphill. It was called the uphill at that point.
Oh, it's called the uphill at that point? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
With the hill being, was uphill misspelled, UPHEEL.
Oh.
I had come up with that name for a previous version of a hill climber. And it was, the story I'm about to tell you is how it got better. By the way, readers may not know, the pioneer of pioneers, especially in American backcountry skiing, was a guy named Paul Raymer. Paul's in the Front Range. He was literally a rocket scientist who was an avid backcountry skier and started getting into mut bindings. If anybody wants to go look up the original Raymer Alpine touring binding, he was all Alpine touring. You will see the exact mechanism that became the NTN. I'm not the NTN, the tech binding, which is pins and a ball and socket. That was Paul pioneered all that, worked out all the physics, proved it out for years and years. And then when the Dynafit guy, I just drew a blank on his name, he literally took a Raymer binding and started putting it into boots, kind of like I was doing the NTN and other things. And that was the beginning of it before he got to a way smaller, more integrated kind of thing. But it was all Paul Raymer's deal. Well, Paul, among other things, produced the first avalanche beacon of the day, which would not recommend it to anybody, but it worked. It was early, but he came up with the first heel lift to increase performance. And in fact, it was a little rotating thing, kind of like some of the NTN heel are now, where you just kind of turntable rotate the heel piece so it's out of the downhill mode, and you get this heel climber that comes up underneath you. That was exactly how his worked. So they copied that exact kind of thing, and it had two different sizes. It had a normal size. It was just a kind of a plastic cone shaped thing. And then there was another plastic cone that came with your binding. You could slip over the first one that would make it taller. But the very first ones, Paul actually had a compression spring loaded in it, which kind of like you've seen some of these crazy running shoes over the years where people have put a spring in the heel, and some have been banned by the Olympics and stuff. Because if you're fit enough, and there are very few people are this fit, it would give you a power booster either running or going up a hill. But Paul's estimate was there was about 3 people on the planet that were fit, because you had to literally run on it, right? You had to go. Your pace had to be at the pace of the spring bouncing up and down, because you had to catch the bounce. You'd smash it down, then you had to go with it. You couldn't slog along, so you were literally running uphill. And not many people can do that. So he figured that out, took the spring out just to simplify it. But that was Paul's deal, was the heel lift. And if you could get a hold of an old Raymer catalog, that would blow your mind. Anyway, so I had a heel lift, all along, like almost everybody. That wasn't something we invented. Ours had some features that were maybe a little better than others, and some that were worse than others, but it was just in the mix. In fact, Rick Lou, I talked about from Chenard years ago, he actually did the first one for Telebindings.
Was that the Televate?
Yes, it was the Televate.
Gotcha.
And it worked pretty good. Everybody kind of stuck to that formula, just a bail that popped up one way or the other. Well, the one thing we did differently is on the Superloop, ours came up and it made an A-frame because it was more stable once it was up rather than just the bail, because those bails could flip down real easy. And if you got kind of loose in your binding and your heel slipped sideways, it would just bend them and ruin them. And so we just added a little stability, but we didn't move it down the field very much. Anyway, so I came out with a Hammerhead, worked on that. I knew that I needed a better, more elegant solution for the heel lift, and that's where Chris comes in. So I met Chris the first time when he was 10 years old. He and his family just moved to Jackson Hole. His dad was a real successful business guy, and they just showed up and wanted to climb the Grand and contracted with Exum, like most people do there in Jackson. There's Jackson Hole Mountain Guides there too, does a great job, but Exum's kind of a legendary organization. And so I just happened to be on the mountain at that time with another client. They weren't my clients, and it wasn't a normal thing to have a 10-year-old kid climbing the Grand. So I just got, I had kids at that point. So I was just talking to him, and he was a great kid, he's super fun. They climbed the Grand. I wish I could remember who their guide was at the time. But anyway, and then we just sort of stayed in touch off and on. And then my wife and I actually got to be parents with their friends. Got to be friends with his parents for a few years, and go out or having dinner or stuff like that, and just kind of track with it. Chris went off to college, went to Clarkson College up in New York. I want to say upstate New York, but you can look it up, somewhere in there, and wanted to get a mechanical engineering degree, and he did. And he met a buddy, Collins, who was also getting a mechanical engineering degree, and they just became brothers. And long story short, he comes back after college. He looked around for different mechanical engineering jobs, realized pretty quickly that, like a lot of engineering students, that if he really wants to bring his ideas to life, at a minimum, it's going to be 10 years of just sucking it up, doing grunt calculations of somebody else's idea in a workshop somewhere or in front of a computer that day. And that wasn't really what he's looking for. So he was just home for a while, and he calls me up. He said, hey, do you need an intern? So we caught up a little bit, and I said, so by intern, do you mean like somebody that works really hard for me and doesn't get paid anything? Yeah, I said, because sure, he was such a great guy, and still is. Just having him around is just, it's a joy just to be around him. And so I said, come on, we'll talk about it, kind of thing. And so he came up, and I showed him kind of the operation, and he had seen some of it before, but I showed him at a different level. And I said, look, I really don't have anything for you to do. But we got talking. I said, but you know what? How about this? I'm wanting to work on this new heel lift design, and I got plenty to do. I said, what if I just gave you that project, and you just see what you can do with it? And of course, he was like, yes. He did not even really know what he was saying yes to. So I went and showed him. I'd already started this research. I showed him the research from Paul Ramers all the way forward to that day and everything in between. And I had extensive notes on what was good about it, what was bad about it, even my products, intermixed in there. And then kind of a little list of hope for, things that would be nice that no one's ever done to be good to see. And kind of just make sure, here's the end in mind, right? Begin with the end in mind, Stephen Covey's old second habit. And so he went to work and he would come and he would say, well, I had a real elaborate wire bending kind of jig and we could make anything we wanted and by hand and had some really good spring wire and stuff. And so I showed him how to use that a little bit. The thing I learned early on was you never had to show Chris how to do something more than once. It's just smart to the genius level, particularly when it came to practical and mechanical and hands-on and seeing things. Had a $75,000 CNC milling machine. I mean, we had a 21st century tool and die shop up there. And I showed him how to, kind of use it to one basic thing. Well, hell, within 2 weeks, he was doing stuff that I didn't know how to do on it. And just kept doing it. And he would come back and he'd show me something. And, about the third thing he showed me, I went, dude, I think that's the basics of what it's going to be. And then he just kept working on it. Anyway, long story short, that was 100% his design and idea. And we put it into production next year on the whole thing. And it was, I get a little fuzzy, but it was somewhere a couple of years that Cheryl and I had decided that we were going to move on from Rainey Designs. There was I had this real passion about helping fathers and sons build their relationships with each other and doing it through outdoor adventure. And I'd started this program up in Jackson Hole. It's called Adventures for Life now. And it was amazing work because part of my backstory was just a real tough relationship growing up with my dad. And we reconciled or started that process when I was 35 years old. And so it was a mission. And I said, look, you're the only person, Cheryl and I know, and you're the third person to know, because I know, you kind of were looking for this to grow into a job, and I just want to let you know. I don't know what's going to happen. So we've had some inquiries from some of our big competitors over the years, and for everything from selling and working with them, and all this kind of stuff, kind of becoming their binding department. And it's the people they were all the big guys, and so I told him that, and he went off. Well, it was, I don't know, maybe 3-4 days later, whatever. Came back and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And so we sat down. He said, we're rehashing. He said, what would you think if Collins and I wanted to buy the business? And I was like, I love that, man, because, it would just be sticking with its roots, basically. And so long story short, we came, to a really easy agreement, frankly. And he had some financial backing and to kind of make it happen. And he's just worked it. And I'll tell you what, this big shout out to Chris. It's just a longer story, but my wife and I, through all of our sort of just, purpose in life, mission in life, we ended up going to Africa for basically 5 years in Rwanda and helping with economic development there post-genocide. And I was using some of my innovation skills to help them with some of their housing needs. And anyway, because of my long background in housing, but about the time we were leaving, Telly was really, waning to the point where I was getting really worried that if the boot manufacturer stopped, this was just going to be it. But and I lost touch for a little while, just gotta say. But Chris just stuck with it. And just stuck with it through dark days, through lean days, to the point now where Tellian's sort of resurging, and 22 Design's it, and not because it's got the best products, which I think it does, but they just stuck it out when everybody else got out.
Yeah,
so
100%.
I just got to say that, for Chris to do that and stick it out, because I stuck out some tough times too. And that's just a commitment that nobody knows about, except those folks on the inside. So I just, want to honor Chris for and Collins for just having done that for the sport we all love.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I totally agree. I mean, those they took your legacy and then have built upon it. Like many good things in the world. It's like I think you guys all kind of played a bricklayer role, and they're building. You laid a good foundation for them, and then they kind of took it from there. But yeah, it's really cool to see, and that was part of I've loved talking to you just about all the Rainey design stuff and kind of how that all came to be. But I love, people that are getting into Telemark. Part of what I love is the history, because for those that are interested in it, I think there's a lot of roots that people may not, they don't know that when you look at an early blue Hammerhead, it says Rainey Designs on it. And,
that's right.
And then there was a blue Hammerhead that said 22 Designs on it. And then there was a black hammer, there's some cool history that I don't want people to not know about if they're interested in where things came from, because I think that helps us all out.
It's funny you say that about the logo. So the first version of the last generation of the Super, going with the front throw, I was building my own injection molds at the time, and the most complicated mold I'd ever built at that point was that front throw mold, because the challenge with plastic, it's easy to shoot it in and have it come to a shape. The challenge is, can you get it out of the mold in that shape? So anything that pierces what eventually is going to be a hole in the part when it's finished has to go in as the mold closes and retract out as the mold opens. And it's like the mold splits on one plane, but those holes a lot of times are perpendicular to that plane or other angles. So it can get really complicated. Well, so I built this mold, long story short. I mean, it was like 6 months working on this mold. And I go down to my injection molder, take it down to the Emmys in Utah, and we stick it in there. And, the first time this press, which is about to put 300 tons of pressure onto this mold. And the first thing you don't want to see, because you close the doors, throw on your safety glasses, you don't want to see a whole lot of parts exploding out of there at the speed of sound. And when it closes that first time. And so that's the first thing you're waiting for. And then the part comes out. And I remember the part came out. I'm just ecstatic. I'm jumping down. It worked. And my molder kind of looks at it for a second and goes, yeah, I've done that before. And I'm like, what? Because I could tell if something was wrong. And I kind of go, and I can't find it. I'm like, it looks perfect. Let's assemble it and see how it works. And then he said, look a little closer. And kind of looked around. And the Rainey Designs logo was the mirror image.
Oh, no.
Because in a mold, to get the logo to not be the mirror image on the finished part, you have to carve it into the mold as the mirror image.
Wow.
And so when you set your CAD program up, the last thing you do before you go carving it in that hardened tool steel is you mirror it. Let the CAD program mirror the thing and put it in there. Well, I'd forgotten that step. And so it comes out, well, it was too late. I mean, we were literally going, we shot all the parts, put them all in the truck and drove back up to Jackson Hole. And so it was too late. And so we had a little contest that year for anybody that came up with the best reason that that we had the logo mirrored on the thing. Whoever could figure out why we actually did it, claiming some, intention where it was just a mistake. If somebody can figure it out, I'll send them a free binding. And we had 2 winners. And the one winner was, so as you're standing in front of the mirror, admiring yourself and you're holding up your skis and you're admiring how rad you look, the logo looks right.
See, you got pretty good at PR by the end.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm really good at BS. Is what I'm good at. And the second winner, because it was just an all-out tie. There was the second winner, so you could take the front throw and stamp it into the snow, and people could read Rainey Designs in the snow. And both of them, I couldn't have thought of either one of those. I was like, yeah, the only reason you would do that is if you're an idiot like I was.
That's amazing. Oh, man. Well, Hey, thank you so much for spending time. This has been,
We're going to do this again, aren't we?
I would love to do this again.
Right.
It'd be fun to, I think I'm getting to, I'm digging back into the history. You mentioned Paul Parker. He was another one.
Oh, yeah.
I've thought that what would be fun now that I'm kind of getting through a lot of the original list I had, it's only taken me 3 years. I would almost like to see if I can get some combinations of people on here, like get you and Paul Parker, or you and Dosty, or something like that. We could have some fun conversations.
Dosty and I'd be fun. He came down here I guess he was up seeing you, and then he came down here last year.
Yeah,
and stayed with us. And we skied. Because you were talking about next generation of the things. The hopeful thing is I have 2 grandsons that live right next door to me. Well, actually, my grandsons and I, we actually believe we live together, and we have a custody arrangement with my daughter, which is their mom, because they're my mini-me's, man. They're everywhere. All I got to say is, hey, you guys want to, and it's, yeah, they call me Papa. And they're 10 and 8 now, and they're just little rippers, but they both love teleskiing.
Oh, cool.
And what in fact, I've only seen one super loop up at Purgatory since I've been here. Until yesterday, I saw the second one on Josh, but it's been my grandsons because they want to ski the original binding that I put together, whatever many years ago, and we get out and rip, and the of course, as finding them boots and all that kind of stuff for their smaller foot size, but they love it. So it's good.
That's amazing. Well, I'm glad that I'm glad it lives on there. And yeah, I would love to get out and make some turns with you too. I'm not too far away from you, so
yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to come up to OR here in January.
Oh, cool.
And so hopefully we'll look it up, and if Dosty can come there again. Dosty and I have a tradition of going and find some great Indian food. It's our favorite food.
That's so funny because every time he comes to Salt Lake, that's where I take him.
Yeah. Well, there was this one called Taj Mahal down on it was like 4th and State or something like that. I was there last time I was there. It's just so good. And it's so good. I'd come to Salt Lake because we had some of our manufacturers were in Salt Lake. And on my way back, I know that my family wanted stuff. I'd literally get a takeout order for them. And it's about 4.5 hours or so up to Jackson. I'd put that over in the floorboard of the car, cover some blankets, and the little takeout. And I'd get home because my family loved Indian food too, my kids, and my grandsons now, they love Indian food. But I'd get home and there was just still a little bit warmth left in there. We had this great meal.
I love that. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's good. We'll definitely stay in touch, and I'd love to grab some food, make some turns. That'd be a good time. Maybe I'll even pull out some super loops and some super comps.
I got to come to the shop and see the archive.
Oh man, I would love to go through it with you because you could probably point it out. I mean, I've learned so much just talking to you today. I mean, I think it would be fun for you to see some of the other crazy stuff that somehow we've acquired. So
that'd be good.
Well, cool, man. Well, happy holidays to you and your family, and I'll look forward to catching up again soon.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.
Well, talk about a deep dive. If you, I did not mention it in the intro that that was going to be that long of a podcast, but if you're here and you listen that long, there's nothing to trim out of that. I mean, one, I don't edit these things because I think it's so important to have all of the conversation in there. And there was just so much I wanted to talk, and honestly, a lot of it was just great just to sit there and listen to Russell flow on a bunch of the ideas that he had, how things came to be. That's what these history podcasts are for me, is documenting what has happened, how things happened in the first place, what led them there. These origin stories I think are so important even today, as we talk about Telemark, not only as users of the product, but those that are interested in the business side. I think many of these stories are still very, very relevant in today's place, and many times I think we can learn a lot from history, and I think that's kind of goes without saying, but that's just across the board. History is incredibly important. The more time we spend looking at what has happened and how things happened, that helps us a lot in our own personal journeys. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. He was obviously, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, he was one of those probably top 3, honestly, probably top. There's probably top 100, but there's so many people I want to talk to for various reasons, and he's been one of those. And I'm so grateful he gave that much time and dropped so much knowledge and so much history. I'm just so stoked about it. So before I take off for the day, please don't forget to sign up for the mailing list. We send it out twice a week, first of the week, last part of the week. Keep you in the know about what's going on with Freeheel Life as a brand, events, what kind of retail stuff we've got in that's new, sales that are happening and whatnot, and make sure you're up to date on all the content to keep you stoked. So please do that. If you want to connect with me on social media, I always encourage people. Instagram, I'm super active on there at Josh Nomadson. You can find me on there. Also at Josh Nomadson on Facebook. Facebook forum, I'm active in there every week, posting stuff, talking to people. That's a great place as well, and would love to connect with you somewhere on the intergalactic web. So please check that out. Freeheellife.com for all your telemark needs. And please email me at podcast@freeheellife.com. And more importantly, if you're an Apple podcast user, please rate and review the podcast. I love those reviews. The rating and the reviews help me get in front of more people. Share Telemark with them and let them know what's going on. And I really, really, really appreciate that. And I'm just psyched. We're going to do some skiing this week and heading into the holiday season. I hope all of you enjoy some time with some friends and some family, and hopefully some time dropping knees. And I'll be here next Monday. And until then, spread Telemark always.